Hello everyone, this is Shadow. Due to copyright restrictions on YouTube, I can't publish many of the audiobooks you love. That's why I've created a special paid service where you can enjoy over 300 high-quality audiobooks from platforms like Webnovel, Pocket FM, Audible, Wuxia, and more. Each novel comes as a one-time purchase, no subscriptions, no hidden fees. After payment, you'll receive full access via Telegram, along with all future updates for that novel. You'll find a wide selection of your favorite genres and titles, always in premium audio quality. Check the full list of available novels in the description. DM me now to get your favorite stories in audiobook form and start listening today. Also, you can request any novel so I can turn into audiobooks. Check out our Patreon for more details.
11. Chapter 11. The Wolf's Flight. The snow fell silently over Winterfell, its icy flurries clinging to the grey stone walls like a heavy shroud. Inside the ancient halls of the fortress, Lyanna Stark sat by the high, narrow window of her chamber, her fingers cold despite the fire roaring in the hearth. The scent of smoke and pine filled the room, but it brought her no comfort. Her eyes were fixed on the path leading out of the gatehouse, watching for a raven that never came. Days had turned to weeks since the coronation of King Rhaegar Targaryen, and still, no letter, no message, no word. She wrapped her arms tighter around herself, not from the cold, but from the hollow ache in her chest. He had promised her songs, freedom, a life beyond the stifling walls of her northern prison, but all she had now were memories and dreams that faded like mist in the morning. Winterfell had once been a place of wild laughter and sibling squabbles, where she could ride her horse across the Godswood trails and spar with the stable boys without shame. But that was before Brandon had returned from the Riverlands with his new bride. Catelyn Tully, Lady Catelyn now, was everything Lyanna was not. Graceful, composed, soft-spoken. She moved like a swan through the great hall, all flowing silks and delicate smiles. And she disapproved of Lyanna from the moment they met. Lyanna still remembered that first week after the wedding. Catelyn had spoken sweetly to Brandon by the hearth, her hands folded primly in her lap, her Tully blue eyes betraying a hint of ambition. Perhaps, my lord, a sept would serve your people well, to honor the seven, and mark your rule with piety. Their father, Lord Ricard, had nearly choked on his ale. This is the north, my lady. We kneel to the old gods beneath the weirwoods. There'll be no southern shrines built here. Catelyn had turned red as the embers in the fireplace. Later, behind closed doors, her fury had risen like a storm tide. She threw a quiet but seething tantrum, demanding Brandon support her. But Brandon, ever the proud wolf, had simply walked away. His heart belonged not to his wife, but to a woman in Barrowton. Everyone knew it, though none dared speak her name aloud. From then on, Catelyn turned her attentions to Lyanna. You shouldn't ride like that, Lyanna. You'll scar your legs. A lady should not brawl with kitchen boys, it is unbecoming. A proper maiden would not speak so openly in court. On and on it went. Her whispers, her glances, her disapproving sighs. It was as though Lyanna's very existence was an affront to Catelyn's sense of decorum. And Lyanna? She had tried. Gods knew she had tried to be civil. But she was not Catelyn. She never would be. Lyanna was a wolf of the north, not a river trout trained to swim in calm waters. She was wild, unpolished, fierce. Now, even the castle felt foreign. The warmth she once felt in the echoing halls of Winterfell had faded into cold stone and longer shadows. She missed Rhaegar. The thought came unbidden, and it twisted something deep inside her. She remembered his voice, low and solemn, his silver hair falling over his violet eyes as he played his harp beneath the great tree at Harrenhal. The way he spoke to her, not as a lord to a lady, but as a man to a woman, with tenderness, curiosity, and depth. He had promised her that there was more to life than duty and expectation. You are not meant to be caged, he had told her once. You were born for greater things than dust and silence. And she had believed him. Every morning since his coronation, she rose early, hoping to see the flutter of wings, the arrival of a raven bearing his seal. And every evening, her heart sank just a little more when the skies remained empty. Would he come for her? Or had he bowed beneath the weight of his crown, abandoning his promises at the altar of duty? Still, she waited. Because hope was the only thing she had left. And wolves, after all, were patient hunters. The wind howled low through the stone corridors of Winterfell, tugging at the ancient banners that hung above the great hall. Snow powdered the windowsills, but within the walls, warmth and celebration reigned. Fires crackled, mead flowed, and music echoed from lyres and drums as the people of the north gathered to mark the 16th name-day of Lyanna Stark, daughter of Lord Ricard, sister to Brandon, Eddard, and Benyon, betrothed to the Warden of the Stormlands. But no part of Lyanna's soul stirred with joy. Outside, she wore her best smile, her dark hair braided with winter roses, her pale blue dress chosen by Caitlin Tully to soften her wild edges. She greeted the bannermen, nodded to the lords and ladies, and accepted their gifts with murmured thanks. But inside, her spirit churned like a stormy sea. Every song, every toast, every dance was a drumbeat toward her fate, a fate she had never chosen. This was not just a birthday, this was a herald. Her father, Lord Rickard Stark, had waited precisely for this day, her 16th year, to send the official letter south. A raven had already taken wing to Storm's End, carrying with it a message to Lord Robert Baratheon, confirming the readiness of his bride and the blessings of House Stark. Another letter had flown to the Vale, summoning her brother Eddard from the Eyrie and asking Lord Jon Arryn to escort both Ned and Robert north for the long-awaited union. The Tullis of Riverrun, now kin by marriage, had also been invited. A great northern wedding was being prepared, and her father's heart was set on it. It will be under the weirwood, Rickard had said that morning, pride softening the usual stern lines of his face. Not in some southern stone shrine like your brother's. No septons, no seven. The old gods watched over us before the Undals came, and they will watch over you, my daughter, when you speak your vows beneath their white branches. She had said nothing, only nodded. What could she say? She had tried. Gods knew, she had tried everything to prevent this. She had pleaded with her father, citing Robert's reputation. His whores, his drink, the bastard children whispered of in court. She spoke of how he barely knew her beyond her face, her name, her blood. How he loved the idea of her, not the girl herself. How he would ruin her, trap her in a life of waiting while he hunted stags and drank himself into oblivion. But in the halls of power, a man's vices were just that, vices, not crimes. Lord Rickard had listened with furrowed brow but said only, he is warden of the Stormlands, Lyanna. A future Lord Paramount. One day, perhaps even Hand of the King. You are a Stark of Winterfell. This is a match worthy of your name. That had been the end of it. She could not speak of Rhaegar. She dared not. How could she tell her father that her heart belonged to the crowned dragon? That her dreams were woven with harp strings and silver hair? That she longed for the day Rhaegar would ride north not as king, but as a man who had promised her freedom? No, that path was closed to her. He was already married. And though Elia of Dorne was distant, though whispers swirled of her frail health and the quiet life she lived in King's Landing, the truth remained, Rhaegar Targaryen had a queen. And Lyanna Stark, wild as she was, could not make herself a usurper to another woman's place. Not yet. Not without him standing at her side to face the world. So she wore the crown of northern tradition, furs on her shoulders, braids in her hair, smiles on her lips, and waited. Waited for the letter that never came. Waited for Rhaegar to do something, anything. To send a word, to send a raven, to send her a reason to believe that she was more than a passing dream. But Winterfell was quiet, and the snow kept falling. That night, when the music had faded and the firelight cast flickering shadows on the stone walls, Lyanna sat in her bedchamber alone. Her dress was folded over the chair, her hands bare, her hair undone and tumbling like black silk over her shoulders. She stared into the fire, watching the flames devour the logs like time devoured hope. I'm not meant for cages, she whispered to herself. You said that, Rhaegar. But the only answer was the crackling of the fire, and the cold wind scratching against the windowpane like ghostly fingers. She pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders, and the girl known as the Wolf Maid of Winterfell lay down in the dark, her eyes open and full of unanswered prayers. It happened again. As the servants cleared the plates from the morning's meal, Lyanna's face had gone pale, her stomach twisting in a way that could no longer be blamed on rich food or nerves. She had risen from the bench and barely made it out the side door before she doubled over in the snow, retching violently behind the kennels. No one saw her, save for the kitchen boy who quickly looked away, pretending to fuss over the firewood. It had first happened during her birthday feast, an evening of roasted game, honeyed bread, and sweet wine rarely found so far north. They had all dismissed it then. Even she had believed it was the result of indulgence, of a northern stomach not used to southern splendor. But now, it was unmistakable. Her moonblood had not come, not since before her 16th name day, and Lyanna Stark was no fool. Standing in the cold wind, she pressed a hand over her stomach, trembling. Her body was betraying her secrets, revealing truths no noble maiden could afford to wear. The memory of those fevered nights beneath the stars with Rhaegar, whispers in the dark, fingers intertwined, vows spoken in stolen moments, burned within her like the last embers of a dying fire. She had believed him, believed in him. Now, all she had was this growing panic. And a child. She stumbled back to her room in silence, ignoring the curious looks of passing servants. The walls of Winterfell pressed in around her like the bars of a cage. Her chamber felt colder than it ever had. Rhaegar had promised her the world, had whispered of songs and destinies and kingdoms reborn. But he was gone, crowned, burdened, distant. Had he meant to return? Had she simply been an escape for him, just as he had been for her? She sat on the edge of her bed, staring down at her hands. What now? Could she marry Robert Baratheon and pass the child as his? The thought made her stomach turn more than any spoiled meat. She had fought too hard to expose Robert's philandering ways, his bastards, his lusts, his brash oaths. To turn around and deceive him with another man's child, she couldn't do it. Her honor, wild and stubborn as the rest of her, would not allow it. Then what? She had no choices, no allies. She was a maiden of noble birth, of the most ancient house of the north, and noble women did not bear bastards. It would shame her father, her brothers, Winterfell itself. And Lord Rickard Stark had already endured enough shame with Brandon's Southern-style wedding. He had refused to remarry, choosing to raise his children alone. That quiet sacrifice had always been Lyanna's comfort. She could not disgrace him now. There was only one answer. She had to leave. She waited until the moon hung full and silver above the trees. Her plans had been in motion for days, casual questions to the old hunter about provisions, idle chats with stable hands about the best forest paths. No one suspected anything. She'd gathered her meager savings, 28 gold dragons and 8 silver stars. She packed lightly but carefully, smoked jerky, 2 cloaks, a fire starter, bedroll, water skin. Everything tucked neatly into saddlebags hidden by the stable's rear fence. In the deepest hush of the night, Lyanna walked barefoot down the silent corridors of Winterfell. The stone was cold beneath her feet, the walls whispering old stories as she passed. She stopped at her father's chamber, the heavy oak door slightly ajar. The room inside was dark, save for the dull glow of dying embers in the hearth. Her father slept soundly, his thick gray beard rising and falling with his breath. She stepped inside, her heart pounding. "I'm sorry," she whispered, the words cracking from her throat. "I never wanted to do this, but I can't stay. I can't let you bear the shame of what I've done." She stood there for a long moment, watching him sleep, this stern, weathered man who had never once failed her, who had ruled his house with honor and steel. She wanted to reach for him, to kiss his brow, but her hand would not rise. She backed away before her courage failed, returning to her room only to scrawl a letter in trembling ink. "Father, I have run away with the one I love. I met him at the tourney of Harrenhal. Do not search for me. I am going south to be with him, and I beg you, please, forgive me." It was a lie, but a lie to buy her time. She folded the parchment, sealed it, and left it on her pillow. Then she crept from her room for the final time, a shadow among the sleeping halls of her childhood. Through the crypt she went, down into the heart of Winterfell, where a hidden tunnel that led out to the forests beyond Wintertown. The night was cold, the trees skeletal and swaying in the wind, but her path was clear. At the mouth of the tunnel, her horse waited, saddlebags packed and tied, reins looped over a low branch. The old hunter's advice had served her well. She mounted quickly, pulling her cloak tight. The cold bit at her face as she turned the horse toward the narrow trail. Behind her, the great castle loomed, its towers silver in the moonlight, its gates closed, its people asleep. Lyanna Stark looked back only once. A tear slipped down her cheek, freezing on her skin. Then she kicked the horse forward, riding into the darkness of the trees, away from home, from duty, from everything she had ever known, toward a future she no longer dared to dream. Join me on Patreon if you want to request a novel, link in the description. 12, Chapter 12, Steel and Snow. The northern wind was biting cold that morning, but Harry didn't mind. He had grown accustomed to the chill, wrapped in his enchanted cloak, his gloved hands loosely gripping the reins of his horse as they trotted along the damp path veering off the King's Road. The snow had long melted at lower elevations, giving way to stretches of misty hills and pine-covered ridges. Every so often, he glanced up into the sky, where a pale white shape circled lazily above the clouds, his dragon, Winter, gliding with effortless grace. It had been nearly 2 months since he had last seen Doran and Oliver. He realized he owed them more than just silence. They had taken him in when he had nothing, strangers who had treated him like kin, and he hadn't even left a proper farewell. "The Starks can wait," Harry muttered under his breath, guiding the horse off the main road. "I've got time." The ride took most of the day. By late afternoon, familiar signs appeared, the forked tree with the iron nail embedded in its trunk, the moss-covered stones leading to Doran's cottage. But what Harry saw next brought him to a halt. The cottage had changed. The old thatched roof, once sagging and patched with tar, was now fully rethatched and neatly braced with new timbers. A fresh layer of whitewash brightened the cottage walls. There was a carved wooden eagle perched on the doorframe, and 2 flower beets lined the path leading to the porch. As Harry dismounted and walked toward the home, the front door burst open. "Lord Gryffindor!" cried a voice. 2 girls ran toward him, laughing and beaming. It was Elsa and Nina, Doran's daughters, only now they looked very different. Elsa, tall and graceful for her age, wore a deep blue woolen dress trimmed with silver thread, her long dark hair braided with red ribbons. Little Nina, perhaps even more cuter now, wore a fur-lined green cloak and clutched a carved wooden fox in her hands. "Lord Gryffindor, you're back," Elsa squealed, grabbing his arm. "I missed you," Nina added, hugging his waist tightly. Harry smiled, genuinely touched. "It's good to see you both. You've grown." Elsa stepped back, eyes wide. "Did you come for the wedding?" Harry blinked. "Wedding? Whose wedding?" "Uncle Oliver's. He's marrying Beth tomorrow," she announced proudly, like it was a royal event. "Beth from the market?" Harry asked, his smile widening. Elsa nodded rapidly. "Yes, she's going to be our aunt." "Well," Harry chuckled, "I suppose I arrived just in time." The door to the cottage opened again and Doran stepped out, beaming from ear to ear. He looked younger than Harry remembered, clean-shaven, his salt and pepper hair tied back neatly, and his tunic freshly laundered. "Well, well," Doran said, striding forward and clasping Harry's forearm. "I told Beth he'd show up, didn't I, girls?" "You did," Elsa said, giggling. Doran's voice was warm. "Come inside, milord. Come in, my wife just baked honey oat bread." "I'll come by," Harry said, "but first I want to see Oliver." "He's at the mill, still pretending he can fix things without breaking them," Doran said with a grin. "It's just down the path, you remember it?" "I remember." The girls clung to his arms as he walked, asking questions all at once. "Did you go to White Harbor? Did you see a bear? Did you meet the Starks?" Harry laughed as he gently pried them off. "One at a time. I'll tell you everything at the wedding feast, all right?" They agreed, reluctantly, and ran off to help their mother. The mill hadn't changed as much as the cottage, but even here there were signs of improvement: new tools stacked neatly on the side, a reinforced wooden awning over the door, and a sturdy new wheel turning slowly in the stream's current. Harry pushed the door open. Inside, the scent of sawdust and oil filled the air. Oliver stood by a large wooden table, hammer in hand, muttering curses at a plank that wouldn't settle flush. "You're holding the chisel upside down," Harry said from the doorway. Oliver froze. Then he turned, slowly, and a smile broke across his face. "Lord Gryffindor," he laughed, walking over and wrapping Harry in a one-armed hug. "Where in the hells have you been?" Harry returned the hug, grinning. "Around. I heard someone's getting married." "Damn right I am. Beth finally said yes after I got the roof fixed." He leaned back. "Though I think it was the silver necklace you gave me that did most of the convincing." Harry raised a brow. "So I'm the reason for this wedding?" Oliver laughed. "Let's just say your generosity put a few stars in her eyes. You staying long?" "I'll stay for the wedding, of course. Then I've got a trip to Winterfell." Oliver frowned. "You sure you want to get involved with the northern politics?" "I've got my reasons." Oliver nodded. "Well, you've got a place here if you ever need it." "I know." That night, Harry stayed at the mill with Oliver. They talked well past midnight, sharing stories by firelight. When the hour grew late and Oliver finally fell asleep in his chair, Harry stepped outside. Above, the stars glittered like frost scattered across the heavens. And there, like a ghost among clouds, soared Winter, his white scales reflecting moonlight. Harry gave a soft whistle. The dragon answered with a deep throat rumble from above before spiraling higher into the night sky. Smiling, Harry looked toward the distant silhouette of Winterfell. Soon, he thought. But for now, let's enjoy the calm. Smoke curled lazily from the chimneys, and laughter still echoed from the celebration that had rocked the little village all afternoon. The wedding had been a marvel unlike any the small folk had ever witnessed. Tables groaned under the weight of roasted boar, honeyed trout, venison pies, and fresh breads. There were platters of wild berries soaked in cream, jugs of spiced ale, and rare wines flowing like rivers, all of it made possible by the quiet generosity of one man. Harry had discreetly handed Doran a pouch earlier that morning, 20 more gold dragons, enough to feed the whole countryside and then some. "It's for Oliver," he had said with a smile. "Let him start married life with something worth remembering." And remembered it would be. The wedding had taken place before the Godswood tree, an ancient weirwood nestled just beyond the pasture, its white bark gnarled with age, crimson leaves fluttering like bloodied silk in the breeze. It was a sacred spot, and the villagers had decorated it with garlands of mountain heather and bluebells. Beth had worn a crown of flowers, and Oliver stood proud in his best tunic, embroidered for the occasion with tiny gold thread around the cuffs, a gift from Doran's wife. When they kissed beneath the weirwood, the crowd cheered loud enough to wake the hills. That evening, the mill had become a hall of merriment. Lanterns swung from the rafters, casting golden light across flushed faces and swaying bodies. The wine Harry provided seemed enchanted, it never ran out, no matter how many jugs were poured. Villagers drank and danced until their legs gave out, and eventually one by one, the guests staggered home with full bellies and slurred blessings for the newlyweds. Now, the moon had risen high, silvering the quiet world. The noise had died down. The guests had departed, and Oliver and Beth were given privacy at last, their laughter now a gentle murmur behind closed shutters. Inside Doran's cottage, the hearth crackled softly. Harry sat in a simple wooden chair, stretching his legs near the fire, a half-empty cup of mulled wine resting in his hand. "That was a good day," Doran said, slumping into the chair across from him with a tired sigh. "We'll be talking about it for generations." "You deserve it," Harry said with a smile. "So does Oliver. He's a good man." Doran chuckled. "He's a stubborn ass, but a good one." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the kind only shared by men who had earned their rest. Then, Harry's ears perked. A distant clop-clop broke the stillness. Hooves, multiple riders, coming fast. Doran heard it too. He straightened in his chair. Who in the hells would be riding this way at this hour? Harry rose to his feet and moved toward the window, brushing aside the curtain. The road leading down to the mill was lit by moonlight, and he could see them, 6 riders in dark cloaks, hoods up, swords on their hips. They weren't moving like farmers or kinfolk. Their posture was too upright, their pace too steady. "Trouble. I'll take a look," Harry said, setting down his wine. "You stay inside." Doran didn't argue. "Be careful." Harry stepped out into the night, drawing his sword of Gryffindor from his belt. He walked down the gravel path, silent as a shadow, his boots making no sound as he passed between the trees toward the mill. The cold wind had picked up as Harry moved toward the mill, the moon high and pale behind shrouds of clouds. From the shadows, he had seen the riders dismount, Bolton men, armored and armed, their cloaks bearing the flayed man of the Dreadfort. But it wasn't just soldiers. There was another among them, robed in grey, tall, thin, with skin as pale as frost and eyes that held the chill of death itself. Roose Bolton. Harry stayed hidden, crouched behind a low wall of stone and moss, while the Lord of the Dreadfort stepped forward and banged his gauntlet against the mill door. When Oliver opened it, rubbing sleep from his eyes, Harry saw the moment fear overtook him. "You didn't ask for my permission," Roose Bolton said, voice quiet but cruel. "You are my tenant, Oliver. You live on my land. And yet you wed a woman, extravagantly, no less, without even sending an invitation to your liege lord?" Oliver swallowed hard and bowed his head. "My lord, I didn't mean disrespect. It was..." "Quiet," Roose hissed. "You weren't invited to think. You're a miller, not a knight. And I was not invited. Nor was I asked. That alone is offense. But then I hear rumors," he stepped forward, his lips curling into a mockery of a smile, "rumors that your bride is a beauty." Harry's fingers curled into fists as he watched Oliver step protectively in front of the door. Bolton's smile grew colder. "Did you forget our customs, boy? In these lands, a lord is entitled to the first taste of the harvest, be it grain, meat, or women." He looked toward the mill, where Beth no doubt listened in terror from within. "And I intend to collect what is mine." "No, please, she's my wife," Oliver stammered. "She's my subject," Roose replied. Then, with a sharp gesture, he ordered his men, "Drag him out." The soldiers grabbed Oliver by the arms and yanked him into the snow. He fell to his knees, struggling. Beth cried out from within the mill, but another soldier barred the door with his spear. Roose adjusted his gloves slowly. "I'll be brief," he muttered. "A quick visit. I'm sure the girl will learn to enjoy. That's enough." The voice cut through the cold like steel. Every head turned. Harry stepped out from the shadows, cloak billowing behind him, the sword of Gryffindor gleaming silver under the moonlight. He walked with calm authority, eyes fixed on Roose Bolton. One of the Bolton men stepped forward, hand on his sword. "Who in the 7 hells are you?" Harry stopped a few paces away, sword resting at his side but ready. "I'm the man who's not going to let you touch that woman." Bolton raised an eyebrow. "You interfere with the affairs of House Bolton." "I interfere with rape," Harry said evenly, "no matter who tries to justify it." From the ground, Oliver shouted, "Lord Gryffindor, run. Please, you can't fight them all." Roose Bolton narrowed his eyes. "So you're the so-called Lord Gryffindor, the ghost lord of White Harbor." "Humph. I've studied the lords of Westeros since I was a boy. There's no Gryffindor in the north. Not in the Reach, nor Dorne, nor beyond the Vale. Certainly none in the south." He circled slowly, appraising Harry. "And your name, it reeks of invention. Gryffindor? A child's tale. A made-up name meant to impress simple folk." Harry said nothing, letting Bolton talk. "You think you can flaunt wealth and titles without consequence? That you can hand out gold to peasants and dance through the north like you are a king?" Roose's mouth twisted. "I know what you are, a fraud, a pretender, and now, a dead man." With a flick of his fingers, he gave the order, "Kill him." The Bolton men advanced, 4 of them in full armor, swords drawn, their boots crunching through the frostbitten grass. Harry didn't move. He held the sword low, tip resting in the snow, his breath misting in the cold. He let them come closer. 10 paces, 8. Then he gripped the hilt with both hands and stepped forward. Join me on Patreon if you want to request a novel, link in the description. 13, Chapter 13, Lord Gryffindor and the Wolf Maiden. The cold wind blew hard across the northern woods as silence fell around the mill. The snow whispered beneath Harry's boots as he stood alone before the Bolton men, for soldiers in boiled leather and mail, swords drawn, eyes wary. Behind them, Lord Roose Bolton stood motionless in the back, watching with unreadable eyes. Harry held the sword of Gryffindor loosely in one hand, its ruby-studded hilt gleaming in the moonlight, its blade shimmering with a faint, wicked sheen. He remembered it all too well, the bite of the basilisk, the rush of venom on the fang, and how he drove that fang through the mouth of the beast. The sword had drunk deep that day, had absorbed poison no healer could cure. A single cut, Harry thought grimly, and they'd be dead within minutes. But he didn't want that. These men weren't monsters. They weren't Death Eaters. They weren't even the cruel sort. They were small folk raised to be soldiers, servants of the Boltons. They were following orders. That didn't make them blameless, but it didn't make them deserving of death, either. So Harry let the first sword strike come and he blocked it cleanly, sparks flaring where steel met magic. Then he pivoted, ducked under the second man's swing, and drove his fist into the soldier's ribs with a bone-jarring crack. The man fell, wheezing, clutching his side. The third soldier came in fast. Harry spun low and swept his leg beneath the man's stance. The soldier dropped like a felled tree. Another blade came for his shoulder. Harry twisted and stepped close, too close for the sword to matter, and struck the attacker with an open palm blow to the chest that sent him sprawling back into the snow. Punch after punch, kick after kick. No magic, no swordplay, just raw, honed instinct, reflexes sharpened by fighting Death Eaters, training with Sirius and Moody, fighting a war before he turned 17. One soldier tried to rise again. Harry didn't hesitate. He turned and elbowed the man in the temple. He went down and didn't get back up. All four men lay groaning in the snow, bruised, bloodied, but alive. A sharp gasp came from the porch of the mill. Oliver and Beth, hand in hand, stared in disbelief. Harry slowly turned his eyes to the only man remaining, and now he is on horseback. Roose Bolton. The Lord of the Dreadfort looked down at his fallen soldiers, his thin mouth trembling at the corners. His pale eyes darted from Harry to the sword of Gryffindor, and in a single, pitiful motion, he spun his horse around and kicked it hard. Coward, Harry murmured, but he was already moving. With speed no knight could match, he lunged forward and caught the reins, and with his other hand, grabbed Bolton's wrist and pulled. Roose screamed as he tumbled off the saddle, hitting the frozen ground with a crunch and a low groan. His cloak sprawled around him, his ornate boots flailing. Harry stood over him, ice cold. "You came here to ruin a wedding," Harry said. "You came to hurt an innocent woman. Now don't beg for salvation." Roose grunted, his hand reaching for the dagger at his belt. Harry kicked it aside. Then he knelt, one hand still holding the sword, the other pressing against Bolton's chest. "Let's see," Harry said quietly, "what kind of man you really are." And he looked into Roose Bolton's eyes. Legitimacy flowed. The world blurred, and Harry saw. He saw a younger Bolton, face pale and emotionless, ordering a man's wife taken to his bed as punishment for a late harvest. He saw servants flayed for disobedience. A boy hanged for hunting a hare without permission. He saw women screaming behind locked doors, children crying, fields salted, crops burned to teach lessons. Bolton didn't feel guilt. He didn't feel anything. He enjoyed it. The cold, surgical delight of inflicting pain. When Harry withdrew, his face was set like stone. Roose opened his mouth to speak, but Harry gave him no chance. "I've seen enough." The sword of Gryffindor pierced cleanly through Roose Bolton's chest. The man choked once, blood on his lips, and then fell still. Harry stood in silence, breathing heavily, the sword dripping crimson into the snow. Behind him, Beth gasped. Oliver stepped forward, face pale. You killed him." Harry turned slowly. "I did." Doran came running from the path, breathless. "I saw riders from the woods. Are you all?" He stopped when he saw the corpse. "Gods." Harry wiped the blade on Bolton's cloak and sheathed it. "You need to run," Doran said quickly. "Now. You don't know what you've done, Harry. You killed a lord. The North won't care why. They won't care about the truth. The Starks won't have a choice, they'll have to hunt you down for justice." Oliver nodded, grabbing Harry's arm. "They'll send riders, maybe even bannermen. You'll be declared a criminal." Harry looked down at the body. He was no lord. He was a monster. "I know," Doran said. "We all know. But the law. I understand." Harry turned toward the forest. The night was still dark, the snow undisturbed. He summoned his horse from the enchanted pouch and mounted swiftly. He turned back to Oliver and Beth, who stood close together, wide-eyed. "I'm sorry," Harry said, "for all of it, but no one will hurt any of you, as long as I breathe." Beth nodded silently, eyes glistening. Doran stepped forward. "You'll always have friends here, Harry, but you need to go." Harry clicked his tongue and spurred the horse forward, galloping into the woods as snowflakes drifted down like falling ash. Above, circling silently, was winter. The white dragon screeched once, low and long, before vanishing into the clouds. And Harry, the so-called Lord Gryffindor, disappeared into the north once more, leaving behind a mill, a wedding, a grave in the snow, and a legend that would spread across the lands before dawn. The wind held across the icy plains of the north like a wounded beast. Snow fell in heavy, silent curtains as Lyanna Stark rode slowly through the storm, her head drawn low and her furs wrapped tight. Her horse, a sturdy grey mare named Cinder, struggled through the deepening snow with heavy steps. Lyanna patted her neck gently. "I know, girl. Just a little farther," she whispered, her breath fogging the air. "We're both freezing." She had ridden through the night since fleeing Winterfell, but even her Stark blood could not ignore the cold much longer. Her fingers ached despite the gloves, her face was red and raw, and Cinder's legs trembled with exhaustion. She needed shelter, and she knew exactly where to go. Tumbledown Tower. A crumbling ruin off the King's Road, half forgotten, half swallowed by the forest. It had served her family once before, during a short stop on their way to execute a deserter of the Night's Watch. Travelers and hunters still used it now and then, especially in winters like this. If the gods were kind, it would be abandoned. They were. The tower appeared through the mist like a ghost, its jagged silhouette rising against the sky. Stones lay scattered around it like the broken teeth of a dead giant. No smoke, no sounds, no movement. Lyanna led Cinder into the ruined shadow with a sigh of relief. Inside, the tower's bones still held, walls that leaned but stood, and a section of ceiling that kept the snow at bay. She tied Cinder in the driest corner and rubbed her muzzle, whispering thanks. Then she moved to the hidden alcove behind the collapsed wall. As she hoped, a small stack of firewood still lay there, dry, wrapped in an old tarp. She set about making a fire with shaking hands, striking the flint like her brothers had taught her. Sparks flew, flames caught, warmth spread. She sat down, wrapped in furs, and finally breathed. The meat pie she stole from the Winterfell kitchens was cold, but edible. She chewed slowly, staring into the fire. Thoughts came unbidden. Rhaegar, his voice, his songs, the look in his eyes when he called her my silver wolf. The promises of escape and freedom. Her fingers drifted to her stomach, the secret growing inside her. Her father's face rose next, stern, proud, perhaps even heartbroken when he read her note. He would search for her. Brandon, too, even Eddard, from the Vale. All for nothing. She wasn't going south to meet her lover. She wasn't even certain where she was going. Just away. The fire crackled, and exhaustion overtook her. She curled up on the stone floor, cocooned in her cloaks, and drifted into uneasy sleep. The scream shattered her dreams. Lyanna jolted upright, heart pounding. Her hand flew to the dagger at her belt, but it was already too late. The tower was no longer empty. Figures loomed all around her, crouched and growling like wolves. Feral eyes, matted hair, yellowed teeth. Wildlings, at least 10 of them. The fire she built now roared, and beside it, Cinder. Her horse lay dead, her throat slit. The wildlings had already begun butchering her, cutting thick slabs of meat and throwing them over the fire. "That's her awake," one of them rasped, pointing with a bloody knife. "Pretty thing." A man stepped forward, tall and thin with a face like leather and only 3 teeth to his name. He grinned at her with a crooked smile. "Well now," he said, "ain't you a gift from the gods?" Another snorted nearby, drunk off stolen wine. Around them lay crates of supplies, furs, food, even blades marked with castle sigils. Plundered goods, weapons of noblemen. They had raided someone's caravan, and they were still celebrating. Lyanna stared in horror, her voice caught in her throat. The thin man knelt beside her and sniffed. "Southern perfume," he mused. "Clean hands, lashes like a lady." He reached for her face. "What's a fine thing like you doin' out here all alone?" Lyanna jerked her head away. "Don't touch me." "Oh ho." Another wildling laughed. "She bites." "We'll see how long that lasts," said a squat man by the fire. "The lad who found her says she came from the road. Maybe she's runnin'. Maybe a runaway noble girl, eh?" "Then she don't belong to anyone," said the first man, his grin returning. "And that means she's fair game." "No, no, no." Lyanna backed against the tower wall, her hand still on her dagger. The wildlings were drunk and loud. They passed around bottles, laughed, argued. But the laughter was changing, turning ugly. "Who gets her first?" Someone slurred. "She woke in my watch." "Shut your crooked teeth, Drogue." "She looked at me. That means she wants me." Lyanna's stomach turned to ice. "No," she said aloud, louder this time. "You're not touching me." They laughed again, but something in her voice made the closest man hesitate. "Just a flicker. I'm warning you," she said, drawing her dagger. Her hands trembled. "I'm not afraid to kill." The toothless man leaned in close, face inches from hers. "Oh, I don't mind a little fightin'. Makes it more fun." Lyanna slashed. The dagger cut his cheek. He roared and fell back. "You little whore!" he shouted. The tension in the ruined tower hung thick as the flames crackled, casting flickering shadows across the stone walls. Lyanna's breath was shallow, her eyes darting between the filthy faces that circled her like wolves around a wounded doe. Her dagger still trembled in her hand, but the numbers were against her. Then, the sound of hooves. A sharp rhythm of iron against stone echoed from the direction of the broken archway that once served as the tower's entrance. The wildlings stiffened, hands drifting toward stolen weapons. One of them spat into the fire and snarled. "What now?" A lone rider emerged from the swirling snow, cloaked in heavy furs, that had pulled deep over his face. His horse, white with ice dusted across its mane, snorted and stomped the frozen earth. "Greetings, strangers," came a voice from beneath the hood, calm, smooth, and unhurried. "I am a fellow traveler myself, and the night is far too cold to ride further. I see you have warmth. Might I join your fire?" The wildlings exchanged glances, confused. The man's tone held no fear, no urgency, and he had no blade drawn. The leader of the wildlings, Drogue, the one with the toothless grin, stepped forward with narrowed eyes. "You must be mad, rider. This land ain't for highborns playin' at adventure." The man dismounted without comment, brushing snow off his shoulders with a deliberate grace. His boots crunched across the stone floor as he approached the fire, cloak shifting with each step. Beneath the furs, one could just make out fine black boots, a deep red tunic, and the glint of a silver fastener. He looked like a lord. Lyanna's eyes widened in alarm. "No, don't come closer," she cried. "These men are wildlings. They'll kill you." The stranger paused. His head tilted slightly as he turned to face her. For the first time, Lyanna could see his face clearly, youthful, sharp-jawed, with a quiet intelligence behind his green eyes. He blinked at her. "Wildlings?" he repeated. Even the wildlings gaped at him now. "You don't know who we are?" one of them growled. Harry frowned. "I thought you were fellow travelers, hungry ones, by the smell of roasted horse. But I suppose I should ask, what is a wildling?" The tower went silent. Join me on Patreon if you want to request a novel, link in the description. 14, Chapter 14, Beyond the Wall, The Greyfinder and the Silver Wolf. Snow whispered against the collapsed roof and spiraled into the open ruins like ghostly breath. Harry sat cross-legged beside the fading flames, his cloak wrapped tight around his shoulders, eyes still flickering with thoughts. Lyanna Stark sat across from him, wrapped in a fur blanket, her face pale from cold and fear, yet her eyes burned with stubborn defiance. Around them, the wildlings lounged like wolves after a fresh kill, picking meat off the remains of her horse, sharpening stolen weapons, or swigging stolen wine. Harry's gaze drifted from the toothless man who had grabbed Lyanna earlier to the others, men and women hardened by frostbite, famine, and exile. Then something clicked. "So, when you called them wildlings," Harry said slowly, turning back to Lyanna, "you mean the ones the Night's Watch guards against? The ones beyond the wall?" Lyanna stared at him, perplexed. "Of course. Who else?" Harry blinked in confusion. I thought they were monsters, creatures, something inhuman. But they're just people. People like you and me." At this, all eyes turned toward Harry. Lyanna's, the wildlings, even the old man sharpening a sword in the corner raised an eyebrow. Lyanna's voice was cold with disbelief. "You really know nothing of the North?" "Apparently not," Harry admitted. He gestured toward the group. "They're dangerous, yes. But they're hungry, hunted. I get it now. They can't grow food in those frozen lands, can't trade. So, they raid. What other choice do they have?" One of the older wildlings, a bearded man with braided gray hair and a scar down his face, grunted. "At least one kneeler gets it." Harry tilted his head. "How did you get here, though? Aren't there soldiers on the wall to stop you?" The old man nodded. "Some of us crossed the sea in small boats. Others scaled the wall. Like spiders. Like fools. Lost 2 men on the way down." Harry's eyes lit with admiration. "That's impressive. Risky, but impressive." One of the younger wildlings, tall and angry-eyed, spat to the side. "Enough chatter. Let's kill the kneeler and take the girl." He eyed Lyanna hungrily. "Claim her properly, like warriors." Lyanna recoiled, her face twisting in disgust. Harry raised his hand gently, palm open in a gesture of peace. "You don't have to kill me. I'm not like the others from the north." The leader frowned. "Why not?" Harry shrugged. "Because they'll be hunting me soon, too, and I would like to come with you to the land beyond the wall." A ripple of interest passed through the wildlings. Lyanna looked up, startled. "Why would they hunt you?" the bearded one asked. Harry exhaled slowly, staring into the fire. "Because I killed someone." Silence. "Who?" the tall wildling asked warily. "Lord Bolton." Lyanna gasped audibly, clutching her cloak tighter. The entire room burst into noise. Some cheered, others barked laughter. The old scarred wildling gave a hoarse cackle. "You killed Bolton? Ha, That flayed bastard had it coming. Another growled. Skinned my cousin alive for stealing a sheep. May his corpse rot in the snow. Drank wine from a skull, I heard, said another. Serves him right. Harry merely nodded, watching the sparks rise from the fire like fleeting spirits. Then one of the wildlings pointed at Lyanna. But what about her? We can't let her go. She's a noble. If we let her live, she'll bring the wolves down on us. Harry looked up, calm as ever. Then make it fair. A contest. Your way. Let her fate be decided by strength and skill. Several wildlings muttered in agreement. Another added, the old way. Jarl stood. Then an axe-throwing contest. They liked that. Axes were drawn, targets were arranged, a blackened plank of old oak hung on the far wall, marked with a rough red X in blood. Each man who desired to claim the girl took their place in line. Harry was the last. They began one by one, hurling heavy iron axes into the board. Some stuck near the center, others thudded into the walls. Lyanna watched, stone-faced, gripping her blanket tightly. Then came Harry's turn. He stepped forward, calm and composed. His axe gleamed under the light of the fire pit. With a small flick of his finger, barely noticeable, he whispered, impervious under his breath. A tiny enchantment to guide the axe true. He threw. The axe split the center of the X cleanly in two. A perfect throw. A silence fell. Then cheers erupted. The kneeler wins. Someone called. Never seen a throw like that. He wins the girl. Harry turned to Lyanna and offered a faint smile. Come with me. He stepped forward and handed her the reins of his horse. Go, ride to the road. Lyanna stared at him. You won. They'll let you have me. I didn't want to win you, Harry said quietly. I wanted to save you. She looked at the horse, then back at him. I can't go back, she whispered. I ran away. I'll bring shame to my family. I'm not married and carrying a child. Harry's expression softened. Then come with me. To the lands beyond the wall? She asked, searching his face. He nodded. You'll be safe there. A long pause. Then Lyanna nodded slowly. All right, let's go. The wildlings, for once, made no protest. They were already starting to pack their things, preparing to move again. She's with you now, the old scarred one said to Harry. She's one of us. And with that, Lyanna Stark, once promised to a future queen of the south, once betrothed to the warden of the Stormlands, left behind her name, her titles, and her fear, riding with a stranger cloaked in firelight, toward the cold unknown. For nearly a week, they traveled like shadows through the deep pine forests and snowbound hills. The wildlings, skilled in the ways of secrecy and survival, led the group west at first, away from the well-patrolled King's Road. Then, they turned northward, skirting through frozen river valleys and the narrow mountain passes where the mountain clans of the north had long since made peace with silence and solitude. The terrain grew harsher with every league, but the wildlings were sure of their path. They knew the caves that no map recorded, the hunting grounds that bore meat even in winter, and the hidden streams that ran cold but clean. When the moon rose, they walked. When the sun broke through the clouds, they slept. Sometimes in the open under firs, other times in old, crumbling keeps of forgotten men, or in hollowed rock shelters veiled by snow. And always, Harry watched the skies, knowing that above, his dragon followed. Winter was never far. Invisible to the eyes of men, the great white beast flew higher than hawks, his scales blending into the clouds, his presence no more than a gust of wind or a flicker of shadow over the tree canopy. When they slept, winter curled atop distant cliffs or in snowy clearings, silent and watchful. Despite the hardships, there was laughter. Harry had a way with people, and even wildlings weren't immune to his charm. He told them stories, not just of his homeland or foreign wars, but tales of impossible castles, talking portraits, flying brooms, and magical beasts that roamed unseen lands. At first, they thought he was mad. Then, they listened more, and then they laughed. Sometimes they demanded a story before setting up camp or made him swear to continue the tale the next night. In their world of ice and blood, Harry's voice became a light. Lyanna Stark often walked beside him, wrapped in a fur cloak, her long black hair braided in wildling fashion, her gray eyes no longer cold but curious. One evening, as they camped in a high mountain cave that looked down upon the distant frost-covered pines, she leaned closer to him near the fire. You never told me, she said, her voice quiet but not cold. Why did you kill Roose Bolton? Harry stirred the embers with a stick before answering. Because he was about to rape a woman. My friend's wife. Said it was some ancient custom, first night rights. He spat the words with disgust. He thought being a lord gave him the right to take what wasn't his. So, I killed him. Lyanna stared into the flames, silent for a long time. Then you did the right thing, she said finally. Not many men would risk death for a small folk's dignity. Harry looked at her. What about you? Why did you run? She took a shaky breath, her fingers tightening around the fur at her shoulders. Because I was betrothed to a man I could never love, Robert Baratheon. My father arranged it. My brother approved, but they didn't know him like I did. He drinks, fights, beds whores and then smiles like it's all a game. Harry listened, nodding gently. Lyanna continued, her voice trembling with memory. Then I met him, Rhaegar Targaryen, the prince. He crowned me at the tourney of Harrenhal, queen of love and beauty, not Elia, me. She smiled bitterly. We met in secret, made plans for a life away from court, away from Robert. But after he returned to King's Landing to claim his throne, he stopped sending letters. Stopped everything. Harry frowned. You think he abandoned you? I don't know, she whispered. Maybe he was caught. Maybe I was just an escape for him. But I can't go back. Not with a child growing inside me. I won't bring shame to my house. I won't let my son grow up in chains. Harry placed a hand over hers. Then he won't. They said nothing more after that, just sat quietly beside the fire until it died to coals. On the 7th morning, the trees began to thin, and the cold wind carried a scent Harry had almost forgotten, salt. They came upon a long cliffside trail and, from its edge, the world opened to a frozen sea below. At the base of a jagged cliff, hidden by an overhang and thick sea mist, lay the mouth of a sea cave, dark and yawning like the mouth of an old god. They descended the switchbacks carefully, helping each other down slippery rock and icy ledges. The roar of the surf grew louder until it echoed off the stone around them. The cave itself was vast, its interior lined with crates, barrels, bundled furs, and weapons wrapped in oilcloth. Loot from our last raid, said one wildling proudly. Axewood and Bear Island both. A good season. Harry raised his brow. How did you get all this down here? Carried it in piece by piece, said another. And now it's time to take it home. For boats waited at the back of the cave, pulled half out of the water and covered in tarps. The wildlings wasted no time. They hauled the boats to the surf, loaded the supplies, and tested the oars. Harry stood with Lyanna beside the waves, the wind tugging at her cloak, her face pale but steady. Once we cross, she said, there's no coming back, is there? Harry looked out over the grey, endless water. Only if we want to. She nodded, her voice soft. Then let's go. They boarded separate boats, 8 people to each vessel, and shoved off from the icy shore. The water was frigid, the sky full of clouds, and the sea swelled angrily beneath them. But above them, high above the clouds, winter circled like a ghost. No words were needed. Harry could feel his dragon through their bond. Winter would follow, guarding from the sky. Together, they rode toward the lands beyond lords and laws, where the free folk ruled themselves and no oaths bound the will of men and women. Lyanna Stark and Harry Gryffindor had left the world of politics and noble houses behind for now, but fate had not left them behind. Not yet. Join me on Patreon if you want to request a novel, link in the description. 15, Chapter 15, Ice Raven's Refuge, the North Beyond the Wall. The sea was merciful that morning. Its glassy surface rippled gently beneath the hulls of the 4 wildling boats, the tide rolling slow and steady like a sleeping beast. The sky above was cloud-draped but quiet, and the air smelled sharp with salt. No waves, no wind, no storm on the horizon. It was as if the ocean itself had consented to their passage. The boats, crude but sturdy, had no sails, wildlings had no use for them. They were oar-powered, long and narrow, made for speed and stealth, not war. In each boat, oars dipped and pulled, in an uneven but determined rhythm. Harry sat beside Lyanna Stark in the second boat, glancing at her pale face as she leaned forward, arms wrapped tightly around her knees. You're seasick, he said gently, pulling one of the oars from a nearby wildling who gave it up without complaint. I don't know if it's the sea, she muttered, or the child. Her face flushed as she added, or both. Harry gave her a sympathetic look. Rest, we've got this. Lyanna nodded and closed her eyes, leaning back against the bundled furs behind her. Her breath came slow and shallow as she tried to will the nausea away. The wildlings, meanwhile, had no intention of suffering in silence. One of them, a thick-shouldered man with a braided beard and a ragged wolf skin across his back, threw his head back and held a raunchy tune into the sky. Oh my wife she's waitin', with a belly and a blade. Hair like hay and teeth like stone, gods I've missed that maid. She'll beat me when she sees me, then she'll drag me to the bed, where I'll show her how I missed her, till the straw is red. The others burst into laughter, slapping the sides of the boat with their oars in a thudding rhythm. Oi, that's your wife you're talking about, Augur. One of the men in the next boat shouted across the water. Augur grinned, showing more missing teeth than whole ones. Aye, and she's got the strength of a bear and the appetite of 3. I hope she's still waitin'. Their singing resumed, more like howling than melody, full of vulgar verses, crude laughter, and chest-thumping bravado. But behind the jest, Harry could sense it, longing, desperation. These weren't just songs. They were prayers hidden behind dirty jokes. Harry pulled steadily on the oar, matching the rhythm set by the others. It was hard work, but the singing made it easier. Your turn, Kneeler. Someone yelled from the lead boat. Harry raised his voice, loud enough for all 4 boats to hear. There once was a man from down in the vale, who would a fair lass with a fish in a pail. He lost the damn fish, but she didn't much care, for he'd hidden a trout in his britches right there. Laughter echoed across the water. Even Lyanna cracked a smile before covering her mouth to stifle another round of retching. She's not used to sea travel, Harry explained to a nearby oarsman, or wildling food. At that, a small piece of blackened meat was tossed into his lap. Best she start. Tonight it's horse again. Harry held the piece up and gave Lyanna a questioning look. She turned her head away. It was my horse. I know. He set it aside without comment. He would feed her something better later, maybe some dried pears or honeyed bread from his magical trunk. The trunk sat hidden in his coat pocket, magically shrunk. No one knew about it, and Harry had been careful to ensure that its nature remained a secret. The wildlings were not evil, but desperation made men covetous, even friends. Lyanna stirred later that afternoon and asked to try rowing. She managed half a dozen strokes before groaning in frustration and handing the oar back. I can ride a horse through a blizzard and split an arrow with my own, but this is torture. Harry grinned. It takes time. I don't have time, she said under her breath, resting her hand on her belly. The sun had begun its slow descent when Harry leaned toward her, curiosity in his eyes. Tell me about your family, he said. She blinked, caught off guard. Why? Because I've met lords and ladies, but never a Stark, and I like to know things. Lyanna sighed and looked out over the water, her fingers tightening around the boat's edge. There's not much to say. My father, Lord Rickard Stark, is a hard man. Not cruel, but distant. He never remarried after my mother died. He always said the North doesn't need more songs, it needs strong roots. Sounds like a Stark thing to say. She smiled faintly. It is. My eldest brother, Brandon, was the wildfire in our house, brave, reckless, stubborn. He was married to Caitlin Tully. She stopped herself. Harry nodded solemnly. Then there's Eddard. We called him Ned. He's quiet, thoughtful. I think he would have made a better maester than a lord, but he bears the Stark name with pride. Do you look like him? She laughed, genuinely now. No, Ned looks like our father. I look like our mother, or so I've been told. I was the unruly one, the daughter who climbed trees, threw snowballs at squires, and snuck into the kennels to play with the wolf pups. There is also Benjen, my younger brother, and I miss him already. Doesn't sound like a bad family to me. It wasn't. Not until I was told I'd be married off to Robert. She spat the name like it tasted sour. The boats glided forward, oars cutting the calm sea. The Bear Island patrols hadn't seen them, or if they had, they hadn't bothered to interfere. That suited Harry just fine. By dusk, the clouds burned orange along the western horizon. The men grew quieter, the singing faded, and even the tapping of oars slowed as muscles tired and voices faded. Harry glanced skyward once more. Winter was up there, he could feel it in his chest. A steady presence. A protective force. No words were needed between them. The bond was enough. As Lyanna finally curled beneath a fur cloak and fell into a restless sleep beside him, Harry kept rowing, his arms aching but his resolve firm. They were heading toward freedom. But freedom, Harry knew, was never free. It was early morning when the horizon began to shift. A distant glimmer broke through the lingering mist, a white peak, jagged and glorious, pierced the pale blue sky. The wildlings saw it first. The tallest among them pointed and shouted, "Home!" The others took up the call, and soon the boat surged forward with renewed vigor. The oars dipped faster into the still sea, spurred on by the sight of snow-covered mountains rising like frozen sentinels above the bay. Harry leaned forward, his breath catching as the land came into full view. The beauty was raw and brutal, steep cliffs draped in frost, waterfalls frozen mid-cascade, and a jagged coastline dotted with black stones and thick pine forests. But it wasn't the mountains that drew their focus. It was the narrowing inlet they were rowing into, a bay shaped like a wide triangle, its mouth yawning before gradually tapering into a slender, winding fjord. Towering cliffs stood on either side like walls, and the echo of their oars splashing against water bounced off the stone. There was a haunting quietness here, broken only by the occasional cry of sea birds and the creak of wooden boats. As the passage narrowed, Harry stood, straining his eyes ahead. There, he whispered to Lyanna, nudging her gently awake. She stirred, blinking the sleep from her eyes. What is it? Look. And then she saw it. Nestled in the cradle of rock and pine, tucked just far enough from the sea to be hidden from the shoreline, was a village. Not made of stone or timber like those in the south, but of immense tents, some the size of halls, stitched together from the hides of elk, bear, and mammoth. Long tree trunks had been carved and hammered to serve as support beams, angled in a conical shape to resist the weight of snow. Smoke curled from holes at the tops, rising lazily into the cold air. Crows circled above the village in great numbers, their cries echoing like sentries sounding an alarm. Harry turned to Jarl, the broad-shouldered wildling who had guided them since their meeting. "This is it?" Jarl grinned. Ice Raven Village. My home. My father is chief here." They beached the boats on a strip of black sand where the cliffs receded. As the wildlings leapt into the icy shallows and hauled the boats ashore, Harry helped Lyanna down carefully. She clutched his arm for balance, still uneasy from the voyage. The first to greet them weren't warriors, but children. Bundles of fur with tiny hands and curious eyes, the children of the Ice Ravens ran toward the returning raiders with shrieks of joy. Some carried wooden clubs, others dragged toys made from driftwood. They stopped short when they saw Harry and Lyanna, tilting their heads as though examining mythical creatures from stories. One child with a red foxpelt hat pointed at Lyanna. "Is she a ghost?" Another giggled. "She's got hair like snow." Jarl shooed them away with a laugh. "Go on now, fetch your mothers." He led Harry and Lyanna through the outer edge of the village, where furs hung from wooden racks and smoked meats dangled above drying pits. Women emerged from the tents, joy lighting their faces as they ran to greet the returning men. Laughs, tears, and kisses filled the air, but not all shared in the joy. Some women stood alone, eyes searching the arriving boats, finding no familiar face. One woman dropped to her knees when she realized her son hadn't returned. Jarl's smile faded as he approached the large tent at the village's edge, a towering structure supported by carved pine beams. "My father's hall," he said. "Come." Inside, it was warm and smoky. A fire burned at the center pit, and seated near it was an older man, his face carved from stone and wind. His beard was streaked with gray, and scars crisscrossed his brow. He rose when he saw Jarl. "My son," he said, clasping his arm. Then his eyes moved to Harry and Lyanna. "These are your guests?" Jarl nodded. "The one who killed Roose Bolton." The chief's gaze sharpened. He stepped forward and studied Harry as one might inspect a weapon. "That alone makes you a friend. You may stay, both of you." "Thank you," Harry replied, bowing slightly. "But I hope you don't mind, I may suggest some changes." That earned a grunt. Outsiders always want to change what they don't understand. Harry left it at that, for now. They spent the day moving through the village. The stolen goods were unpacked, crates of wheat, barrels of wine, axes and boots and rope, all taken from northern settlements. The villagers were efficient and jubilant, but Harry's eyes noted more than celebration. The tents, even the largest ones, were poorly insulated. Snow crept in through the cracks, and the wind rattled the hide walls. Children coughed from cold air. The camp had no wall, no defense, not even a watchtower. And the location was perilous, hidden only by isolation. "We can build something better," Harry told Lyanna that night. "But they won't listen yet. They don't trust outsiders," she murmured, sitting beside him near a crackling fire. "Can you blame them?" "No," he said softly, "but I'll earn it." As the days passed, Harry made himself useful. He healed a child's frostbite using herbs he brought in his trunk, helped repair leaking tents with clever stitching charms, and hunted in the nearby woods, always careful to hide his magic. But Lyanna, she became the focus of unwanted attention. Whispers followed her wherever she went. Men stared, some openly, others through narrowed eyes. Her highborn looks, her clean skin, her grace, she was too different, too desirable. She wasn't one of them, and they knew she wasn't Harry's wife. One evening, a wildling approached Harry with a grin. "You'll trade the girl? I've got a fine goat, even fatter than her." Harry's jaw tightened. "She's not for trade." Another man, emboldened, offered him a sack of dried fish. For just one night. That night, Lyanna trembled as she sat beside Harry. "I can't stay here." He nodded. "We'll leave soon. Head north, past even this place." "Where will we go?" "To the edge of the world," he said. "And then, if there's nothing beyond, we'll build something." They stayed 2 more weeks. Long enough to rest. Long enough to mourn the dead. Long enough to learn what they could of the Ice Ravens, who despite their ruggedness, were still people trying to survive in a world that had forgotten them. When they left, it was with little ceremony. Jarl met them at the edge of the village. "You're going into the mountains?" Harry nodded. "Further north. Maybe east, if the path allows." Jarl handed him a wrapped bundle. "Dried meat, furs, and bone knives. Gifts from my father, and from me." Harry took it. "Thank you." As they walked away, Lyanna pulled her cloak tighter. "Do you really think we'll find peace?" He looked back once at the village of smoke and tents, then forward, into the white expanse. "If not," he said, "we'll make it." Join me on Patreon if you want to request a novel, link in the description. 16, Chapter 16, A Dragon in the North. There are many things that made Lyanna Stark shocked. In the 15 years she lived, a few had left lasting impressions: the death of her mother when she was still a child, the first time she stole Brandon's horse and fell trying to ride it across the frozen stream near Winterfell, the moment Prince Rhaegar Targaryen placed a crown of blue winter roses on her head at the tourney of Harrenhal, and more recently, the discovery that she was pregnant with Rhaegar's child. Then, of course, there was her near assault at the hands of wildlings. But what she saw now easily made it to her top 3 most shocking moments. A massive white dragon descended from the sky. It appeared from the pale clouds like a phantom, its wings slicing through the air in silence, only the roar of wind announcing its approach. The dragon landed before them, snow billowing around its gigantic claws as it touched the earth. It was enormous, larger than any warhorse, larger than a hall, with scales as white as snow, sleek and unblemished. Its wings folded with a graceful rustle, and its large, slitted eyes gleamed like polished ice. Lyanna gasped, stumbling a step backward. "What in the name of the old gods?" she whispered, instinctively pressing herself behind Harry. Harry stood calmly, as if he hadn't just been met by one of the most fearsome beasts known to man. He looked at the dragon with quiet fondness, no fear in his posture. "Lyanna," he said, turning slightly, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder, "this is my dragon. His name is Winter." Lyanna blinked. "You have a dragon?" Harry smiled. "Yes, he's been following us forever. Quietly, he always keeps an eye on me." Winter exhaled through his nostrils, and the warm steam from his breath wafted into the freezing air. Lyanna felt like her knees might buckle. The stories of dragons were just that, stories. Tales sung by bards and whispered by old crones around hearths. Everyone knew the dragons had died out with the last Targaryens during the Dance of the Dragons. And yet here stood a living legend. The dragon lowered its head slightly, its piercing gaze fixed on her. Harry nudged her gently forward. "Winter wants to meet you." "Meet me?" she hissed. "It's a dragon." "He's more than that," Harry said. "He's intelligent. He understands us." Winter shifted again, flicking some of the snow from his wings as he adjusted his position. The dragon stared at Lyanna, tilting its massive head as if waiting for her to do something. Lyanna took a shaky step forward. Hi, Winter," she said awkwardly, raising a hand in the air. Then she added, in a whisper, "Don't eat me." Harry laughed behind her. "He won't. He will protect you." Winter gave a slow, deliberate nod, and the sight made Lyanna freeze in place. "He understood you," she said in disbelief. Harry nodded. "Of course. Dragons are connected to their rider. But Winter, he's more than just a beast. He's seen worlds beyond this one. He understands fear, anger, even sorrow." Lyanna turned to look at him. "Where did you get him?" Harry hesitated. "That's a long story. One for another time." They stood in silence for a few moments, the snow falling gently around them, and Winter's breath steaming in the cold air. Then, Harry asked, "Would you like to fly with him?" Lyanna's mouth dropped open. "What? He can carry us both. He won't drop you, I promise." She looked at Winter, then back at Harry. "Is he safe?" "He's the safest place you could be." Winter lowered his massive body to the ground, wings splayed slightly for balance. A low, rumbling sound emerged from his chest, not a growl, but something softer. Harry climbed up first, expertly gripping the dragon's spine ridges. He held a hand down to her. Lyanna hesitated for a moment, then took his hand. The moment she settled behind him, Winter lifted into the air. The earth fell away beneath them as the wind rushed past, and Lyanna clutched Harry tightly. The sensation of flight, true flight, was like nothing she had ever known. The cold air slapped her cheeks, the snowflakes stung her eyes, but the feeling of freedom was overwhelming. They flew high above the nearby glacier lake, over forests, mountains, and frozen rivers. From this height, Lyanna could see the world stretched out below her like a map. She let out a laugh, wild and free, and Harry, seated in front of her, smiled. When Winter landed again, it was in a clearing near the edge of a glacier, far beyond the reach of any wildling settlement. The air was sharp, the silence profound. Lyanna stumbled slightly as she dismounted, her legs weak from the thrill of flight. "You're insane," she said breathlessly. "Do you know that?" Harry grinned. "You liked it." She did, but she wasn't about to admit it. Winter moved behind them, curling into a resting position, wings tucked close. Lyanna looked at Harry, still trying to piece everything together. "Who are you, really?" she asked. Harry looked up at the sky. The clouds were parting, revealing the pale blue of the northern morning. "A boy who grew up in a cupboard," he said softly. "A boy who lived. A man now trying to live on his own terms." She furrowed her brow. "A cupboard?" He chuckled. "Another story for another time." They made camp there, with Harry conjuring a small magical shelter, nothing that would arouse suspicion, just a windbreak and heat charms for their blankets. Lyanna sat beside him, the silence between them no longer awkward. "I'm not sure where we go from here," she admitted. Harry looked toward the north. "Further, until we find a place where no one can find us." "And what then?" He turned to her, his voice steady. "Then we build something new." And far above, circling silently like a guardian in the sky, the white dragon Winter watched them, unseen by any soul save his bonded. The morning air was biting cold, crisp with the scent of pine and the faint tang of frost. Lioness Stark had begun to grow used to waking among snow-laden boughs and canvas covers, but what greeted her that morning made her sit up with such suddenness that the blanket slid off her shoulders. There, not far from their makeshift camp, stood the dragon, Winter, massive, pristine, wild. The dragon's white scales shimmered like fresh snow in the rising sunlight. Its long wings folded gently to its sides as it crouched over its meal, a recently slain mammoth. Its tusks were broken, its thick woolen hide ripped open, and steam rose from the open carcass as Winter tore into it with deliberate satisfaction, like a cat that had just found a fat mouse. Lioness swallowed hard. By the old gods, she whispered. He caught a mammoth? Yes, Harry said cheerfully from beside her, already crouching down to light a small magical fire near the canvas lean-to they'd raised the night before. He bring down one last week. They're surprisingly fast for their size. Took me a while to believe the mammoth exist here. Yes, mammoths are near extinct in the Westeros, Lioness said, incredulous. Only ever read about them in old Maester Wallen's scrolls. There's some mammoth beyond the wall, Harry said, standing again and brushing the snow from his cloak. Still, an easy hunt. He's been practicing. She wrapped the blanket tighter around her shoulders. I feel like I'm living in a fever dream. Harry smiled and reached into his cloak pocket, pulling out what looked like a tiny wooden box. What's that? She asked, watching him curiously. Instead of replying, Harry tapped the box with his wand and muttered, Engorgio. Before her eyes, the box expanded into a large, intricately carved trunk, the kind that looked like it belonged in a nobleman's solar. Lioness stepped closer, astonished. Is that a trunk? Indeed, Harry said with a grin, kneeling before it. He flipped open the lid and began to rummage inside. Out came bundles of dried vegetables wrapped in enchanted linen, spice jars with labels in a flowing script she didn't recognize, polished cooking pots that gleamed like silver, and thick slabs of cured meat still glistening with salt. Where did you get all this? Harry shrugged, setting a pot over the fire. Collected them, bought them, traded for some in White Harbor. Others I brought from, well, far away. You're rich, she said, watching him with narrowed eyes. You're more than a wandering swordsman, aren't you? I never claimed to be just a swordsman, he replied with a wink. But then how do you know cooking? Didn't you had servants? He tossed a handful of chopped onion into the pot, and a warm, savory smell immediately began to rise. Because I like it. Food is one of the few ways to bring comfort in a wild place. When she tasted the stew he prepared, thick with meat, vegetables, and spices that danced on her tongue, Lioness couldn't help but groan in delight. Gods, this is better than anything I've had at Winterfell. High praise from the daughter of a warden of the north, Harry said, offering her a slice of crusty bread he had baked over the coals the night before. She nodded, licking her fingers. Better than the royal kitchens, I'd wager. Their moment of calm was interrupted by memory. Lioness looked toward the woods, toward where the Ice Raven tribe had once stood. They told us to stay, she murmured. Said the rest of the free folk wouldn't be so kind. I remember, Harry replied, stirring the pot. But kindness doesn't build a future. I want to offer something else. And what is that? She asked. A home, he said simply. A place where wildlings or free folk can live without fear. Where they can work, grow, trade. A real settlement. With walls, with order. Lioness studied him as he stood and poured her a bowl. Do you really believe that's possible? Harry handed her the bowl and crouched beside her, gazing out into the white wilderness. I have a dragon. I have gold. I have magic. And I have you. That made her cheeks color, and she looked away. But more than that, Harry continued, I have a dream. If we settle near the eastern edge of this land, we can build a port. Not for the Seven Kingdoms, they'll never trade with the wildlings, but for Essos. The free cities don't care where the goods come from if the gold is real. Lioness frowned. You'd risk your life for that? I already have. Later that day, they took flight on Winter's back, soaring high above the frozen forests and ice-covered valleys. The land below was white and ancient, dotted with craggy cliffs, dark lakes, and the occasional herd of elk fleeing at the dragon's shadow. For 3 days they flew, stopping only to sleep in shallow caves or among thick evergreens. Harry used his magical compass to orient himself while Lioness kept watch with sharp northern eyes. Then, at last, Harry saw it. The river. It was a grand and ancient artery of water, winding through the snowfields like a silver snake. The river forked sharply into 2 distinct branches, creating a natural wedge of land protected on 3 sides. The perfect spot. There, he said, pointing. That's where we'll build. Lioness squinted. That's the Antler River. I read about it once, only a few ever dared live near it. Floods, harsh winters, and legends. Harry grinned. I like legends. As winter descended toward a wide, flat section of the land between the forks, Harry looked thoughtful. What should we call it? You're asking me? She said, stunned. He nodded. It's our home now, our dream. She thought for a moment. Something northern, something that speaks of survival. I was thinking. Harry hesitated, then smiled. Narnia. She blinked. Narnia? A place from a story I read as a child. A land of magic, snow, talking animals, and endless wonder. A place where even the most unlikely people can become kings and queens. Lionel let the name roll off her tongue. Narnia. And for the first time in weeks, she smiled, genuinely, freely, with hope. Narnia, she repeated. Then let's build it. Harry nodded, placing a hand over hers. Together. And high above them, winter roared, a cry that echoed across the vast white wilderness, as if the dragon himself was claiming the land, their future, their Narnia. Join me on Patreon if you want to request a novel, link in the description. 17, Chapter 17, Magic in the Walls. Lyanna Stark awoke to warmth. It was the first sensation she registered, true, enveloping warmth that wrapped around her like a mother's embrace. For a disorienting moment, she thought she was back at Winterfell in her old bedchamber, curled beneath heavy woolen quilts, the fire crackling in the hearth nearby, and her maid gently calling her to wake. But the silence was too deep, too pure, and the scent was not of burning pine logs or beeswax candles, but of fresh wood, melted snow, and something faintly herbal. She opened her eyes slowly. The ceiling above her was smooth and dark, made of polished wood planks that gleamed faintly in the morning light. A soft ray of sunshine poured through the square-paned window to her right, illuminating a corner of the room where a stack of books sat neatly on a carved shelf. The air inside was warm and still, and her breath did not fog before her. For the first time since leaving Winterfell, she had slept without cold biting at her toes or fear clenching her stomach. She pushed the blanket aside, thick, quilted, and impossibly soft, and swung her legs out of the bed, bare feet touching a rug laid over wooden floorboards. Her cloak had been hung near the fireplace, which now glowed with soft embers. She realized she was still in her shift from the night before, her braid loose against her shoulder. Then it all came rushing back, the flight with winter, the snowy expanse of the land beyond the wall, the Antler River, and Harry. Harry. She stood and walked to the doorway, rubbing her eyes. The cabin was not large, but it was beautifully crafted. 2 beds sat on either side of the room, each neatly made. Between them, a small wooden table stood with 2 chairs tucked beneath it. Pots and pans hung above a counter where a basin rested, beside a small cabinet that held simple dishes. Near the hearth, a kettle steamed gently, and the scent of something savory reached her nose. Morning, came a voice from the far side of the room. She turned. Harry was crouched near a small wood-burning stove, stirring a pot with a wooden spoon. He was dressed in a dark green tunic and warm trousers, his cloak draped over the chair beside him. His hair was tousled from the wind and sleep, but his expression was content. Lyanna blinked. Where, how? He grinned. You like it? She turned around slowly, still in awe. You made this with magic? Mostly, he said, standing and ladling something from the pot into 2 bowls. I used lot of transfiguration and conjuration. It lasts for about 2 weeks before the structure begins to fade. But it's stable, safe, and more importantly, warm. You made this last night, when I was sleeping, With the help of magic, yes. Still had to gather wood and snowproof the corners. And I enchanted the hearth so it keeps the temperature stable inside. Lyanna walked to the table and sat, still staring around. It's like something out of a dream. He handed her a bowl. Try this. Stew with beans, wild carrots, and salted pork. She accepted it gratefully and took a bite. Her eyes widened at the flavor. If I had met you before all this mess, I would have begged father to make you my personal cook. I'd rather not, he said with a laugh. Too many rules. Besides, I don't cook for money, I cook for myself. She looked down at the bowl, then back around the room. You even made beds, real beds. I don't remember the last time I slept so well. You were drooling slightly, Harry teased, sipping from his own bowl. She shot him a glare. I was not. You were. She rolled her eyes, though a smile tugged at her lips. You're impossible. And you're difficult. But we seem to manage. They ate in silence for a time, broken only by the occasional crackle from the fire. The peace was welcome, the kind that rarely existed in her old life, before secret meetings, fleeing her home, and being nearly assaulted in the wilderness. When the bowls were empty, Lyanna placed hers on the counter and turned toward him again. You said this house won't last long. Harry nodded, leaning back against the chair. A week, maybe 2. That's the limit for most conjured structures. The magic begins to unravel after that. And after that? I'll build a real cottage. Stone, timber, insulation. Maybe even some glass windows if I can melt the sand nearby and transfigure it. It'll take longer, but I want something that lasts. For us, and for the people who'll come after. She crossed her arms and looked at him curiously. You think there will be others? There always are, Harry said. Wanderers, lost ones, families seeking shelter, people who don't fit in with the clans. If we build something strong here, a real settlement, others will find their way to it. And we'll call it Narnia, she said softly. He smiled again. Yes, a land of snow, wonder, and prosperity. Lyanna walked to the window, brushing the frost away with her sleeve. Outside, the dragon lay curled near a ridge, snow already beginning to dust its pale scales again. Winter lifted his head slowly, glancing toward the cabin as if he could sense her gaze. She quickly stepped back. He still terrifies me. He's more bark than bite, Harry said. Unless you're a mammoth. She turned toward him, voice quieter now. And me? Why do you keep protecting me? You don't even know me. Harry stood. Maybe I don't need to. Maybe I just know you're someone worth protecting. She looked away, her fingers brushing the edge of the table. I'm not the girl from the songs, Harry. I'm not a princess locked in a tower. I'm the girl who ran away. The girl carrying a bastard. Then you're brave, he said simply. Silence settled again. She finally looked up. What if we do build this place? What if it becomes real, permanent? Will you stay? Yes, Harry said, without hesitation. This isn't just a hiding place, Lyanna. It's a beginning. And somehow, Lyanna believed him. Lyanna Stark had never seen a man levitate a boulder before, let alone 5. Yet every day since Harry had begun working on their future cottage, she had watched, often from the comfort of her conjured chair near the cabin, as he waved his hand or wand and summoned massive stones from the forest's edge or riverbank, guiding them through the air like they weighed no more than feathers. They would float and hover in the air with a hum, and with a flick of his fingers, the boulders would gently settle into place with precision and grace that no mason could replicate. It was mesmerizing. More so was the man himself. Harry was shirtless that day, his tunic discarded in favor of cooling off from the work. His back glistened with sweat beneath the pale sunlight, muscles shifting with each movement as he walked across the rising stone foundation. He wiped his brow with a rag and then raised his hand again, guiding a fresh tree trunk, recently felled and stripped of its bark, into position. Lyanna tried not to stare. She failed, miserably. It must be the pregnancy, she told herself. That's what it was. Hormones. Wild, unpredictable, treacherous hormones. But it didn't help that Harry was so calm, so capable, so unlike the men she had grown up around. She had known lords and knights her whole life, men full of bravado and sharp tongues, adorned in fine silks or heavy armor. Men like Robert, whose affections came in the form of bold declarations and loud laughter. But Harry, he wasn't loud. He didn't boast. He built, he planned, he cooked, God's help her, better than any castle chef she'd ever known. And he listened. Truly listened when she spoke. And when he sparred with his enchanted dummies, armored log men that moved, swung, and even insulted him in crude, magically infused voices, she found herself laughing out loud. Swing like that again, and you'll drop your own blade, you half-wit goat. One dummy had bellowed just that morning. Harry rolled his eyes and jabbed it through the belly with a clean strike. Better? He asked, marginally. Still wouldn't scare a crippled badger, the dummy replied. Lyanna had nearly choked on her breakfast. Now, she stood at the edge of the clearing, arms crossed over her chest, one foot resting on a moss-covered stone as she watched Harry shift a pile of stones into a neat row. She bit her lip, cheeks flushing when he turned slightly and caught her watching. You're staring again, he said with a teasing grin. I'm not, she lied. I was just watching your technique. Very graceful. Oh, interested in learning? Lyanna looked down at her swollen belly. She was just beginning to show, barely, but her gown had grown snug. In case you haven't noticed, I'm a bit preoccupied. Harry chuckled, lowering himself to sit on one of the partially built walls. True, but when the baby comes, and you feel ready, I'll teach you. Sword, bow, knife, whatever you want. She looked up, surprised. Really? You'd teach me to fight? His gaze softened. Of course. I think every person should know how to defend themselves, especially in a world like this. No one's ever offered, she said quietly. Not even my brothers. Father always said I should learn music and dancing, not the blade. Well, Harry said, pulling on his boots and standing again, then your father's a stubborn old man. She smiled faintly, eyes shimmering. He is. They fell into silence again, save for the crackle of magic and the occasional thump of a rock settling into place. Lyanna eventually approached him, watching closely as he flicked his wrist and a small gust of wind brushed dust from a newly set joint in the wall. I thought you said using magic for construction was a bad idea, she said, folding her arms. It is, he replied without missing a beat, if you're trying to conjure the materials. Magically created things don't last long. But these stones? These trees? They're real. I'm just using magic to move them, not change them. So the cottage won't fall apart. Not unless you plan on hurling mammoths at it. She snorted. I'll try to restrain myself. Harry smiled at her warmly, then turned back to the work. I'm insulating the walls with clay. Helps trap heat. Once the walls are finished, I'll enchant the roof to be waterproof until I can finish the shingles. She reached out and ran her hand along the newly stacked stones. They were smooth, well-fitted, mortared with natural earth that smelled clean and cool. You've built all this in just 3 days. Well, I had help, he said, glancing at the enchanted tools that hovered nearby, brushing off excess debris or smoothing edges. And what happens when this place is finished? She asked, softer now. Will you keep building? Harry paused, turning toward her with a more serious expression. Yes, one home is a start. But if we want a real settlement, a place people can live, raise children, farm, trade, then we need more. Houses, a forge, storage huts, maybe even a school. She looked at him with a strange expression. You've thought this through? I've had a lot of time to think, he said simply. And people deserve a life with dignity, not one spent hiding in caves or scavenging off the dead. She hesitated. And me? Harry turned to her fully. What about you? Where do I fit in all this? His eyes searched hers. Wherever you want to. I won't cage you, Lyanna. You're not here because I saved you or because of the child. You're here because you chose to be. She swallowed thickly, a rush of heat and emotion rising in her chest. She nodded and turned away quickly, brushing a stray hair behind her ear. Behind her, Harry went back to work. And she watched him again, this time with something deeper than just admiration. She was no longer just a runaway lady. She was a woman standing at the beginning of something new. A foundation being laid, not just of stone, but of trust, of purpose, and maybe, just maybe, of love. Join me on Patreon if you want to request a novel, link in the description. 18, Chapter 18, Building Together. When Lyanna Stark first set foot inside the finished cottage, she stopped dead in the doorway. Gods, she whispered, unable to help herself. It was not a simple cabin, not really. The walls were thick and solid, built from carefully fitted stones that still held the earthy scent of riverbanks. The high wooden beams overhead met in a sturdy peak, the roof lined with thatch Harry had layered in precise, overlapping rows. Light poured through the front windows, actual glass panes, not made out of wood, making the place glow golden in the afternoon sun. She turned slowly in the entryway, taking it all in. The wide main room had a great fireplace in the center, its hearth framed by smooth river stones. A broad wooden table stood nearby, with mismatched chairs that Harry had carved himself. Every piece was slightly uneven, the surfaces imperfect, but to Lyanna they felt more genuine than any polished furniture she had known in Winterfell's halls. Off the main room were several other chambers, 2 bedchambers, a storeroom already lined with sacks of flour, salt, smoked meat and dried vegetables, and a smaller room that Harry explained would one day serve as a study. There was even a trapdoor leading down into a cool, dark cellar lined with stone shelves. She climbed back up, brushing dust off her skirts, and met Harry standing in the doorway, arms folded, watching her reaction. You built all this, she said quietly, her voice almost lost in the vast, echoing space. He shrugged, though a faint flush colored his cheekbones. You're a noblewoman. I thought it wouldn't do to have you living in a glorified shed. Lyanna shook her head slowly. This isn't a cottage, Harry. It's a hall, a proper house. It'll do, he said, almost shyly. She turned to face him fully, searching his eyes. And you built it with your own hands. Mostly, he admitted. Magic helped. He said it like it was nothing. Like he hadn't labored day after day, hauling stones and timber, shaping every beam, laying every brick, until his hands were raw and his voice hoarse from explaining what he was doing. Lyanna felt her throat tighten. You didn't have to do all this, she said, softer still. I did, he answered simply. I wanted a place you'd feel safe. Her gaze dropped to her hands, which she twisted in the fabric of her skirt. No one, not her father, not Brandon, not Rhaegar, had ever worked so tirelessly for her comfort, for her dignity. And this man, this stranger from a world she couldn't fully comprehend, had built her a home. When she looked up again, Harry was watching her carefully, as though worried he had overstepped. She swallowed hard, summoning a shaky smile. I suppose I'll have to learn how to keep it clean, then, she said, trying to sound light. He chuckled, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. That part one can help with. Though I was hoping you'd do less work than more. You should rest. I've done quite enough resting, she said firmly. I can't just sit here watching you build everything. You're with child, Lyanna. You don't have to. I want to, she interrupted. Maybe I can't haul stones or cut timber, but I can learn to cook, and I can tend the hearth. You can't be expected to build a settlement and feed us both single-handedly. He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. All right, we'll do it together. The next morning, Lion awoke to the sound of hammering outside. She dressed quickly and stepped into the cold dawn, wrapping a fur cloak around her shoulders. Winter lay curled nearby, his white body blending so perfectly with the snowy slope that she nearly missed him. He cracked open one eye as she passed, then settled back to sleep. Harry was already at work, standing beside a circular stone foundation that had appeared overnight. He straightened when he saw her approach. "You're up early," he said. "I could say the same," she replied, eyeing the half-finished walls. "You finished the house yesterday. What is this?" He wiped sweat from his brow. "A smokehouse. We'll need to preserve meat if we're going to stay through the next winter. Once the rivers thaw, we'll have fish to dry, too." "You never stop," she murmured. He smiled faintly. "Someone has to keep busy. And what would you have me do while you build another house?" "Whatever you like." She hesitated. "I'd like to help." He tilted his head, studying her. "You mean that?" "I do," she said. "I may not know how to build anything, but I can learn to cook. I can keep the hearth. I can." She looked away, voice lower. "I can be useful." "You're already useful," he said gently. "But if you want to learn, I'd be glad to teach you." That day, Harry taught her to start a fire from nothing but flint and steel. She nearly took her own eyebrows off 3 times before she managed a proper spark. "Don't laugh," she scolded as he covered his grin with one hand. "I wouldn't dream of it," he said solemnly, though his eyes were bright with amusement. He showed her how to gut and clean a rabbit, how to slice vegetables without losing the tip of her finger, and how to boil water without scorching the bottom of the pot. Lionel listened carefully, determined not to embarrass herself further. In the evenings, she practiced kneading dough and spicing stews while Harry worked outside. She heard the rhythmic thunk of his axe and the creak of ropes as he raised beams into place. When she peeked out the window, she saw him laboring by lamplight, sleeves rolled to his elbows, hair damp with snow and sweat. Something warm and unsettling curled in her belly. The nights were growing longer, the air sharper, but the house remained warm. And slowly, so slowly she hardly noticed, the hollow ache of her running, her shame, her fear, began to ease. One evening, as she sat beside the hearth stirring a pot, Harry came in, dusting snow from his shoulders. "Smells wonderful," he said, leaning over to sniff the steam rising from her stew. "Don't flatter me," she said dryly. "I've only just learned not to burn everything." He chuckled and sat across from her. For a while, neither spoke. The fire cracked, casting golden light over the stone walls. She glanced up and found him watching her with that steady, quiet gaze. "What?" she asked. "Nothing," he said softly. "Just, glad you're here." And despite everything, her lost home, her uncertain future, Lyanna realized she was glad, too. Here, in this improbable house, they were building something neither of them had ever had. A place that belonged to them alone. The morning had dawned pale and cold, thin sunlight glittering across the hard-packed snow. Harry had been up before dawn, dressing in warm furs and carefully fastening the scabbard of his sword across his back. Lyanna, still sleep-heavy, watched him from the edge of her blanket as he packed his satchel with dried meat, a flask of water, and a small, battered leather book. When he turned to her, his face was serious. "I'll be gone most of the day," he said. "Perhaps longer." Lyanna's heart gave a strange little lurch. "Where are you going?" He hesitated, just long enough to make her stomach twist. "North," he said at last. "I have things I need to find." "What things?" she pressed. "Books," he admitted, "and information. There are ruins, old places where magic once thrived. I need to understand this land if we're to survive here." "You're going alone?" she asked, unable to hide the note of worry in her voice. He smiled faintly and reached to brush a stray curl from her cheek. "I won't be alone. Winter will be with me." Her throat tightened. "When will you come back?" "Before nightfall if I can." He paused, studying her face. "Lyanna, stay here. Or if you must go out, don't stray far from the house." "Why?" "Because until I know what's in those hills, I don't trust what might be watching." His gaze sharpened. "Promise me." She nodded, though unease coiled in her belly. "I promise." Satisfied, Harry turned and stepped out into the cold. A moment later, she heard the heavy rush of wings as winter launched into the sky. When she finally gathered her courage to look out the window, she saw the dragon soaring north, Harry a small figure on his back. She didn't see them again for the rest of the day. By late afternoon, Lyanna had exhausted every chore she knew how to do. She'd cleaned the kitchen twice, swept the hearth, and sorted the small piles of vegetables and dried grains Harry had brought from White Harbor. When she tried to read, she found herself glancing up every few lines to peer out the window, as though Harry might appear any moment. Her thoughts grew darker as the hours passed. What if he'd left her? What if he'd grown tired of her helplessness, her belly swelling with another man's child? What if he'd flown off to find some SSC beauty with clever eyes and no burdens? She pressed her palm against her stomach and closed her eyes, shame prickling hot in her throat. "You fool." You hardly know him, you have no claim on him, but knowing it didn't stop the ache. After she forced herself to eat a little bread and broth, she decided she couldn't sit idle any longer. She wrapped her cloak tightly around her shoulders, stepped outside, and began to walk along the edge of the river that bordered the western side of the property. The cold wind bit at her cheeks, but it felt good, steadying. She followed the river's curve for a while, boots crunching over crusted snow. When she finally looked up, she froze. Across the stream, less than 50 yards away, a hunting party moved among the trees. 18 men, wildlings. She counted them automatically, her heart thudding in her chest. They carried long spears and crude bows, and in their midst, they hauled a massive elk tied to a sled. Several of them were laughing, voices carrying across the quiet river. She stumbled back a step, breath caught in her throat. If they saw her, but none of them looked her way. In fact, when one tall man glanced directly at her, his gaze slid across the trees behind her as though she were invisible. His eyes didn't even flicker. Lionel's pulse pounded in her ears. She glanced over her shoulder, half expecting to see some cover she'd failed to notice, a bush or a tree. But there was nothing. She stood in plain view, and yet they saw nothing. They moved on, dragging their prize, their voices fading into the snow-laden pines. She waited until the last of them disappeared before she turned and fled back toward the cottage, her heart hammering. It was well past nightfall when she heard the low rush of wings again. She rushed to the door, pulling it open just as winter descended like a falling star. The dragon landed without a sound, and Harry slid down from his back, his cloak heavy with frost. He looked tired, but when he saw her in the doorway, relief softened his expression. "I'm back," he said simply. She didn't answer. She only stepped aside to let him in, shutting the door behind him before her voice broke free. "You were gone all day," she said, her words sharper than she meant them to be. "You said you'd return before nightfall." "I know." He set his satchel down and rubbed his gloved hands together over the fire. "I found what I was looking for, but it took longer than I planned." "You didn't tell me where you were going," she whispered. He looked up at her, surprise flickering in his gaze. I didn't think that I'd worry," she said, her voice rising despite herself. "That I'd sit here wondering if you were dead or if you'd decided you were done with me." Something in her chest cracked, and she swallowed hard, blinking back tears. "I'm sorry," Harry said quietly. "I never meant to make you feel abandoned." She hugged her arms around herself. "I saw wildlings, 18 of them, on the riverbank. They looked straight at the cottage and they didn't see it." "Why?" He took a slow breath. "Because I put a ward around this place. An enchantment that bends perception. Anyone who doesn't know it's here will look right past it." She blinked. "A ward?" He nodded. "Until I'm ready, until we have walls, defenses, and allies, I won't risk being found. It's not cowardice," he added firmly. "It's caution." Her anger faded, replaced by something rawer, relief, perhaps, or something closer to gratitude. I thought you'd left," she whispered. Harry stepped forward and reached for her hand. His fingers were cold, but she didn't pull away. "I won't leave you," he said. "Not unless you ask me to." Her throat tightened, and she looked away before her tears could spill. Later, after he had warmed himself and they'd shared a quiet meal, Harry set a sheaf of parchment and a quill on the table. "I have a favor to ask," he said. Lyanna raised a brow. "A favor?" He nodded. "I want you to teach me." "To teach you what?" "To read and write." He hesitated. "In Westerosi script." Her eyes widened. "You can't read it?" "Not fluently. I can speak your tongue, but your letters, they're different. The shapes, the marks. I know some, but not enough to read a ledger or write a proper letter." Lyanna felt a smile tug at her mouth despite everything. "You're a man who can conjure a house from nothing, and you can't read the local alphabet." He looked sheepish. "Not yet." She laughed softly, the tension easing from her shoulders. "All right, Harry Potter, sit down. We'll start with the basics." And as she guided his hand over the parchment, showing him how to form the shape of an A, or rather, an ash rune, as the Northmen called it, she realized she no longer felt like a guest in his house. She felt like a part of something, a teacher, a partner. Join me on Patreon if you want to request a novel, link in the description. Chapter 19, Potter Castle and Winter. The days settled into a quiet rhythm neither of them had ever known before. Most mornings began the same way, the golden light of dawn slipping through the small glass panes of their cottage, the warmth of the hearth, and the comforting smell of fresh bread Harry had baked the night before. When Lyanna stirred, she often found Harry already at the heavy wooden table, brow furrowed in concentration as he traced letters onto parchment with painstaking care. "Ash," she said, leaning over his shoulder one morning. "Not ANS, like this." She took his hand gently and guided it, reshaping the crooked rune. He sighed. "You'd think learning another alphabet would be easier after everything else I've learned." "You'd think," she teased, brushing her hair behind her ear. "But you have the handwriting of a drunk chicken." His mouth twitched. "You wound me." Lyanna hid her smile and settled in the chair beside him. From the beginning again. When the weather was clear and the sun hung high over the snow-laden trees, they took breaks from lessons. Harry would head out to build. The single cottage had become just the beginning. First, there had been the smokehouse, a squat round building lined inside with hooks for drying fish and curing meat. Then came a shed for storing tools, a small granary for the sacks of grain Harry had traded in White Harbor, and finally, something Lyanna could only describe as a miniature fortress. It had a thick wooden outer wall, high enough to deter any prowling beasts, and 4 sturdy corner posts reinforced with stone. There was no gate yet, just a simple rope to lift and lower a plank across the entrance. When she asked Harry why he was making it so strong, he simply said, "Because someday, others may come, and they'll need protection." And when she pressed her palm to the wall, she thought, "It already feels like a place meant to last." One afternoon, as she stood in the little stockyard they'd fenced in behind the smokehouse, she found herself laughing aloud. 3 sheep had escaped through the gap Harry had forgotten to mend, and now they were trotting merrily around the clearing, their little hooves kicking up puffs of snow. "Harry," she called, nearly breathless. "They're out again." From behind the new granary, Harry poked his head around the corner. His hair was windblown, and he had a smear of clay on his cheek. "Damn it," he muttered, setting aside his hammer. "I thought I fixed that gap." He jogged over, grabbing a small lamb as it tried to slip past him. It bleated in protest. Lyanna caught another one and cradled it in her arms, her cheeks flushed from cold and laughter. "This is your fault," she said accusingly. "My fault. You said you knew how to build a fence." "I built a fence," he said, deadpan. "I didn't say it was a good fence." She snorted and pressed her face into the lamb's wool to hide her grin. After they corralled the flock back inside, Lyanna sat down on the small milking stool and sighed. One of the ewes ambled over and nudged her shoulder. She scratched its ears absently, feeling a little glow of contentment. "I never thought I'd end up here," she murmured. Harry glanced over, wiping his hands on a rag. "Do you regret it?" She looked up at him, at the wind-chapped cheeks, the honest curiosity in his eyes. "No," she said honestly, "I don't. The evenings belonged to their books." Harry had amassed a small library in White Harbor, and now the shelves in the main room were lined with leather spines, treatises on Westerosi history, tattered volumes of Valyrian poetry, ledgers from merchant captains, even an herbal compendium. And in those quiet hours, Lyanna would sit beside him, one hand resting protectively over her growing belly, and help him sound out the looping letters of Valyrian. "Vezov Jean Azantes," she recited one night, tapping the line with her finger. Harry frowned. "Vezov Jean Azantes. What does that mean?" "He is an honorable knight." He snorted. "Doubt anyone would call me that." "You saved me from wildlings," she reminded him. "That counts for something." He glanced at her, something unspoken in his expression. "You saved yourself, Lyanna. I only helped." Harry's fishing expeditions became another part of their routine. One morning, when she followed him down to the river, she watched in astonishment as he cast a simple handline into the water, then waited patiently until he felt the tug. "You've done this before," she said skeptically. "Never," he admitted cheerfully. "But I figured, the fish here have never met a proper fisherman either. So it balances out." She threw her head back and laughed, startling a pair of crows from the trees. But by midday, he had filled 2 baskets with fat silver fish. That night, she cleaned them while he salted and packed the rest for smoking. When she finally tasted the fresh roasted fillet with a sprinkle of salt and lemon, she thought no banquet in any lord's hall could compare. Soon the little settlement had taken on a rhythm as natural as breathing. There was always something to do, fish to clean, firewood to stack, walls to mend. And for the first time in her life, Lyanna found herself proud of her small accomplishments, learning how to milk a ewe without spilling half of it on her skirts, or baking a loaf of bread that didn't end up as hard as a stone. In the quiet of evening, she sometimes sat on the threshold of the main hall. Harry insisted on calling it Potter Castle, and looked out at the snowy wilderness. Winter would be curled at the edge of the clearing, his massive body blending with the drifts. And beside her, Harry would be scribbling letters, lips moving as he practiced Westerosi script under her watchful eye. "Ash," she corrected gently. He grimaced. "Again?" "Again," she insisted. He sighed, but there was a smile hidden in it. Here, in this impossible place, far from her family, her old life, and all the expectations that had bound her, Lyanna was learning what it meant to start over. And she was no longer afraid of it. Snow fell in whispering drifts outside Potter Castle, the flakes gathering on the eaves and window ledges until the world beyond looked as though it had been wrapped in soft white cloth. The wind keened over the Antler River, but inside, the fire roared warm and bright. Lyanna sat cross-legged on the floor near the hearth, absently darning a tear in one of Harry's woolen cloaks. She wasn't very skilled at mending, more often than not. Her stitches looked like a drunken spider's web, but it felt good to have something to do with her hands. Harry was across the room at the long table, poring over an old leather-bound book with yellowed pages so thin they looked ready to crumble. His brows were drawn in concentration, a lock of dark hair falling over his forehead. From time to time, his lips moved as he silently sounded out a word. She watched him for a while, feeling the warmth of the fire seep into her bones. Watching him had become a quiet habit, one she tried not to think too hard about. After a long silence, she set the mending aside. "Harry," she said softly. He looked up, blinking as though waking from a trance. "Yes? Will you tell me?" she asked. "About you." He frowned faintly. "I told you, I'm from the East. Across the narrow sea." "You're lying." His eyes met hers, startled. "You're kind," she went on, voice quiet but certain. "But you're not a very good liar." He sighed and rubbed his thumb along the book's spine. "Lyanna, I've told you everything," she said, her voice tightening. "About Rhaegar. About my brothers. About what I've done and what I've lost. You know all my secrets, and I don't even know who you are." The words hung between them, raw and honest. For a long moment, Harry didn't move. Then he closed the book and set it aside. He drew in a slow breath, like a man gathering courage. "All right," he said at last. "I'll tell you." Lyanna swallowed and waited, heart beating fast. Harry shifted in his chair, folding his hands on the table. He looked at the fire, not at her. "I'm not from Essos," he began. "I'm not from any land you've heard of. I come from somewhere else entirely. A different world." She stared at him, waiting for the jest, the grin that would say he was teasing. But none came. "A world?" she echoed. He nodded once. "Where I come from, magic and technology exist together. We have great cities, towers of glass and steel, and magic schools, where children are taught to use their gifts. Where a woman can become a warrior, or a leader, or anything she wants." Lyanna pressed a hand to her mouth. Her chest felt tight, like her ribs were squeezing her heart. "And you left it?" she whispered. He looked up finally, his green eyes solemn in the firelight. "I didn't have a choice. I lost everything, my family, my godfather, my home. I was trying to hunt something important, and I ended up here." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The fire crackled between them, throwing shifting shadows on the stone walls. "It sounds like a dream," she said hoarsely. "It wasn't always," he murmured. "There was darkness there, too." She drew in a shaky breath. "And your godfather? You said that word before. What does it mean?" Harry's mouth twitched. "A godfather is someone chosen to watch over you, to protect you if your parents can't." "Oh." She paused. "And you had one?" "Yes." His gaze turned distant. "His name was Sirius Black. He was everything to me after my parents were killed." Lyanna felt her heart ache at the quiet grief in his voice. "He was the one who taught me what family really meant," Harry continued softly. He disappeared in my world. I thought he died. But when I came here, I found proof that he'd been here before me." Her brows drew together. "Proof?" Harry hesitated, then reached for his pack. From it, he pulled a folded scrap of parchment, yellowed and stained with age. He opened it carefully and set it on the table. She leaned closer. Etched in a neat hand across the top were the words, "I solemnly swear I am up to no good." Below it were 3 names, Prongs, Padfoot, and Mooney. "My godfather was Padfoot," Harry said quietly. "And in your histories, you call him Brandon the Builder." Lyanna stared at him, her mouth falling open. "No, that's not possible. Brandon Stark built Winterfell 8,000 years ago." He looked up at her, and she knew in that instant he was telling the truth. There was no jest in his eyes, only quiet certainty. "I don't expect you to believe me," he said, "but it's why I decided to protect you, the family he left behind." She pressed her hand to her belly, feeling the child stir faintly within her. "I do believe you," she whispered. His gaze softened. "Why?" "Because you've never lied to me," she said simply. "And because none of this," she gestured around at the warm house, the stacked books, the flickering fire, "none of this feels like a lie." He looked down, his fingers brushing the edge of the parchment. "I want you to understand, Lyanna. If you stay with me, you'll be part of something bigger than either of us. I don't know what this land will ask of me yet, or what I'll have to do." She rose and walked to him, her hand trembling as she rested it over his. "I was never meant to be ordinary," she said softly. "Neither were you." He looked up, and their eyes met, 2 strangers from different worlds, and yet no longer strangers at all. A long moment passed. Then she drew in a steadying breath and forced a wobbly smile. "Well," she murmured, "since you're learning our letters, I suppose I should also learn to read your letters properly." His mouth quirked. "You don't have to, because I have only few books and they are magical books and they won't be any useful to you." "Of course," she said, her voice catching on a laugh. Harry reached up and brushed a strand of hair from her cheek. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" "For believing me." And though the snow still fell and the wind still howled beyond their walls, Lyanna felt something settle in her heart, something that felt, for the first time in a long while, like hope. Join me on Patreon if you want to request a novel, link in the description. Chapter 20, The Dragon's Lair. Snow fell in a steady hush across the clearing, blanketing the rooftops of Potter Castle in clean white drifts. From the high wooden palisade Harry had built, the wilderness stretched in all directions, endless trees, distant mountains, and the glimmer of the frozen Antler River. Inside the main hall, Harry crouched beside the hearth, unrolling a large piece of parchment covered in lines and sketched runes. Lyanna watched him from the table, where she was carefully copying Valyrian words onto a scrap of hide. "You've been studying that for 2 days," she said, lifting her gaze. "What are you planning now?" He tapped the parchment with his charcoal stick. "A home for Winter." She blinked. "Winter already has a home. He sleeps by the woods." "He deserves better than that," Harry said firmly. "He's too exposed. Sooner or later, someone will see him, and he deserves a place as safe as ours." Lyanna folded her arms. "You mean to build him a house?" "Not a house. A proper lair." She couldn't help it, she laughed. "A lair? You sound like some villain from a bard's tale." He glanced up, the corner of his mouth quirking. "If it keeps him safe, I don't mind sounding like a villain." For the next several days, Harry scouted the land around Potter Castle, sometimes taking Winter aloft to look for any natural caves that might suit. But every crag he found was either too shallow, too exposed, or too narrow to hold a creature the size of a small ship. At last, he came back one afternoon with snow on his shoulders and determination burning in his eyes. "I'll make one," he announced. Lyanna straightened from the drying rack where she was hanging fresh fish. "Make a cave?" "Yes." He began pulling on his thick traveling cloak. "I'll hollow the earth myself. If there isn't a place fit for him, I'll create one." She watched him strap on his sword, though she doubted he'd need it to battle bedrock, and felt something warm flicker in her chest. "You never do anything by halves," she said quietly. He paused, turning back to look at her. "Neither do you." The site he chose lay half a mile from the castle, a low rise of granite that jutted up from the snow like the spine of some ancient beast. Winter liked it immediately. He circled overhead in slow, curious loops, his pale wings blending almost perfectly with the sky. "Go on," Harry called up. "Have a look." Winter gave a soft, rumbling trill before settling atop the rise, tail coiling down the slope. Harry planted his feet at the base of the granite outcrop and closed his eyes. He could feel the weight of the rock pressing down into the frozen soil, the solidity of it. He drew in a slow breath, raising both hands. Excavo. The air rippled around him. Snow fountained upward in slow motion, like water disturbed by a stone. Lyanna, standing safely back, shielded her face with her cloak as the wind stirred her hair. Stone cracked and shivered. A deep, hollow groan filled the air as the front face of the rise sank inward. Harry opened his eyes. A black opening yawned before him, tall enough for Winter to enter, wide enough for him to spread his wings. Lyanna's jaw dropped. That's enormous." "It has to be." Harry stepped inside, his voice echoing. "But this is only the start." For 3 days, he worked. He hauled boulders by magic, stacking them along the walls to strengthen the cave's frame. He smoothed the floors, carving a gentle slope down to a wide resting chamber. Inside, he conjured layers of insulation, thick mats of woven reeds covered with enchanted furs that radiated gentle heat. High in the vaulted ceiling, he left narrow vents for fresh air. Lyanna came each morning to watch. At first, she stood uncertainly near the entrance, but by the second day she perched on a nearby boulder with a basket of smoked fish, passing him bites as he worked. "I can't imagine any creature having a finer den," she told him as he etched a final rune above the entry arch. "It's more than a den," he said, stepping back to survey his work. "It's a fortress." Winter tested it himself by squeezing through the archway, his wings folding close to his sides. Inside, he turned in a slow circle before lowering himself with a contented sigh, his tail curling around his body. Lyanna watched with a smile. "I think he approves." Harry reached up to rest a hand against Winter's massive shoulder. "He deserves it." Later that evening, when the sun had dipped low behind the pines, Harry set the final protections in place. He pressed his palm to the outer wall of the cave and whispered, "Occulto." The rock shimmered like a pond disturbed by wind. A heartbeat later, the entrance vanished. Where there had been a dark opening, there was now only unbroken stone. Lyanna gasped. "You've hidden it?" "I've hidden it from everyone who doesn't know it's there," Harry explained. "Anyone else will see only a cliff face." "And us?" He smiled faintly. "We'll always be able to find him." He walked the perimeter, checking the other wards, heat spells woven into the stone, illusions to hide tracks in the snow, charms to dampen Winter's scent. When he was finished, he stood back and nodded in quiet satisfaction. Lioness slipped her hand into his. "He's safe now," she said softly. He squeezed her fingers. "So are we." That night, as the fire crackled in the main hall of Potter Castle, Lyanna watched Harry set aside his tools with a weariness she understood. "You built a house," she murmured, "a granary, a wall, and a dragon's lair. Is there anything you can't build?" He glanced up, green eyes bright despite his exhaustion. "I'm still trying to build something else," he said. "What's that?" He hesitated, then reached for her hand again. "A future." Her throat closed, and she swallowed hard. "Then I suppose," she whispered, "you'd better keep building." And in the deep quiet of the northern wilds, a man from another world and the daughter of Winterfell sat together, their shadows dancing on the walls of a place they had built with their own hands. The days grew colder, the wind more cruel. Even for Lyanna, who had spent all her life in the north, this winter felt deeper, heavier, as though the land itself were trying to swallow the sky. By then, Potter Castle stood proudly by the frozen Antler River, no longer hidden by Harry's magic. The first time the wards had faded, Lyanna had stepped out onto the front steps and drawn in a sharp breath. It was strange, after all the months of secrecy, to see their home so plainly visible. The walls of stone and wood, the wide yard where the sheep drifted like woolly clouds, the rising smoke from the chimney. But even stranger was the feeling in her heart, a hopeful ache she didn't know she'd been carrying. Maybe, she thought, someone will come. Lyanna began spending her afternoons in the watchtower Harry had built on the southern corner of the wall. From there she could see the broad white sweep of the river, and beyond it the dark line of forest. Some days she thought she could almost glimpse the faraway shape of Winter resting atop his hidden cave, his massive form blending so perfectly with the snow that she had to look twice to be sure. And then, finally, one morning she saw them, a hunting party, 18 wildlings trudging across the river in single file, their spears held high. A handful pulled a sled loaded with what looked like a freshly killed elk. They were bundled so heavily in furs that she could barely see their faces, but when they looked up and spotted the castle, she knew the moment recognition struck them. They slowed. They pointed. Lyanna's heart leapt. She rushed to the battlement and lifted her hand in a bright wave. "Hello," she called. Her voice rang out across the frozen river. "Hello there." For a long moment, none of them moved. She saw them look at one another, saw their expressions darken. "They think it's a sorcerer's keep," she realized. Or worse. Slowly, they began to move again, circling wide around the Antler River. Some of them glanced back over their shoulders, wary, but none came closer. Lyanna lowered her arm, feeling her chest tighten. "They're afraid," she murmured. "Afraid of us." That night, as she sat by the fire, Harry listened as she told him what she had seen. "I don't blame them," he said gently. "They've spent their lives mistrusting anything that looks like power." "I miss people," Lyanna confessed, her voice so small he almost didn't hear it. "I miss hearing voices other than our own." Harry set aside the book he was reading and looked at her across the hearth. "I know," he said. "That's why I took down the wards." She blinked at him. "Truly?" He nodded. "I think it's time they see that we're not here to conquer them." Her heart gave a quiet thump of gratitude. It began at dusk with a low, sighing wind. By midnight it had grown to a screaming gale that rattled the shutters and piled snow high against the walls. Inside Potter Castle, the fire roared as Harry checked each room, ensuring the wards held against the cold. Lyanna sat near the hearth, wrapped in a thick cloak, her hands folded over her belly. Suddenly Harry stopped mid-stride, his head snapping up. "What is it?" she asked, startled by the sudden intensity in his eyes. He didn't answer right away. He closed his eyes instead, fingertips brushing the carved runes in the doorframe. For a moment he stood utterly still, as though listening to something only he could hear. Then he opened his eyes and met her gaze. "There's someone at the outer gate," he said quietly. "The gate?" She blinked. "You mean, the main palisade," he confirmed. "They're pounding on it." She swallowed, her heart suddenly racing. "How do you know?" "The wards," he said, voice low. "When they touch the wall, I feel it." He turned toward the door, already shrugging on his heavy cloak. "Harry," she stood quickly, clutching his arm. "Be careful." His eyes softened. "I will." The snow was so thick it felt like walking through a wall of white. Harry crossed the yard to the massive outer gate, a great reinforced door made of black pine logs bound with iron bands. He rested his palm on the cold wood. The wards hummed faintly beneath his skin, a low, thrumming signal that people waited on the other side. With a quiet word, he dispelled just enough of the concealment to let his voice carry through. "Who comes?" he called. The wind nearly swallowed the answer. But then he heard it, thin and desperate. "We begged shelter. The storm." He turned back toward the castle, saw Lyanna's pale face watching from the nearest window. She nodded once, solemn and sure. He looked back at the gate. "Wait," he called. "I'm opening it." When the great wooden gate swung open on its groaning hinges, a blast of snow poured into the courtyard. 6 figures stood there first, men and women swathed in ragged furs. Behind them, more huddled in the swirling dark, at least a dozen in all, some clutching crude spears, others carrying bundles over their shoulders. 2 small boys clung to a woman's skirts. Harry stepped forward, his cloak whipping around him. "You're welcome here," he said. "But first, bread and salt." They stared at him, suspicion mingling with exhaustion. He raised his hand slowly. "You know the right. Bread and salt for guest right. No harm to you, no harm to us." Lionel came up beside him, carrying a wooden trencher piled with dark bread and a small dish of salt. She offered it to the nearest man, a hard-eyed hunter with frost caked in his beard. He hesitated only a heartbeat. Then, slowly, he tore off a piece of the bread and dipped it in the salt. One by one, the others did the same. The rite was old as the north itself. With it, the tension broke like ice underfoot. Harry stepped aside, gesturing them inside the palisade. "Come," he said, "there's heat and shelter." They passed through the courtyard in wary single file, snow falling from their furs in sodden clumps. The last of them, a boy no older than 10, stumbled as he crossed the threshold. Lionel caught his arm and guided him gently past the door. Once inside the main hall, they stood in a silent cluster, looking around in disbelief. The high beams, the crackling hearth, the woven rugs, it was more than any of them had ever known. "You built this?" the bearded man rasped, turning to Harry. "With my hands," Harry said simply. "And magic," Lionel added, her voice soft but proud. The man swallowed, glancing at his shivering companions. Thank you. You can lay your things by the fire," Harry told them. "Rest. No one will turn you out tonight." They did, moving with slow, exhausted purpose. Lionel went among them with bowls of steaming broth, and Harry laid extra cloaks over the children's shoulders. Hours later, as the storm still held beyond the thick walls of Potter Castle, Lionel watched them drift into uneasy sleep, bellies full, faces thawing. She met Harry's gaze across the hall. "I am very happy that I met you," she whispered. He shook his head. "So am I." And for the first time in many months, she felt that maybe, just maybe, they had begun to make a home that was more than snow and stone. It was a refuge, a promise. Join me on Patreon if you want to request a novel, link in the description.
Hello everyone, this is Shadow. Due to copyright restrictions on YouTube, I can't publish many of the audiobooks you love. That's why I've created a special paid service where you can enjoy over 300 high-quality audiobooks from platforms like Webnovel, Pocket FM, Audible, Wuxia, and more. Each novel comes as a one-time purchase, no subscriptions, no hidden fees. After payment, you'll receive full access via Telegram, along with all future updates for that novel. You'll find a wide selection of your favorite genres and titles, always in premium audio quality. Check the full list of available novels in the description. DM me now to get your favorite stories in audiobook form and start listening today. Also, you can request any novel so I can turn into audiobooks. Check out our Patreon for more details.